Against the Epicureans and Academics by Epictetus. Translation Thomas William Rollston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. Against the Epicureans and Academics by Epictetus. From the Teaching of Epictetus. 1. Beliefs which are sound and manifestly true are of necessity used even by those who deny them, and perhaps a man might adduce this as the greatest possible proof of the manifest truth of anything, that those who deny it are compelled to make use of it. Thus, if a man should deny that there is anything universally true, it is clear that he is obliged to affirm the contrary, the negation, that there is nothing universally true. Slave, not even this, for what is this but to say that if there is anything universal, it is a falsehood? 2. Again, if one should come and say, know that nothing can be known, but all things are incapable of proof. Or another, believe me, and it shall profit thee, that no man ought to believe any man. Or again, another, learn from me, O man, that it is not possible to learn anything, and I tell thee this, and I will teach thee, if thou wilt. Now, wherein do such men differ from those, whom shall I say, those who call themselves academics? Assent, O men, that no man can assent to aught. Believe us that no man can believe anyone. 3. Thus Epicurus, when he would abolish the natural fellowship of men with one another, employeth the very thing that is being abolished. For what saith he? Be not deceived, O men, nor misguided, nor mistaken. There is no natural fellowship among reasoning beings, believe me, and those who speak otherwise deceive us with sophisms. What is that to thee? Let us be deceived. Will it be the worse for thee if all other men are persuaded that we have a natural fellowship with one another, and that we should in all ways maintain it? Nay, but much the better and safer. Man, why dost thou take thou for us, and watch at night for our sakes? Why dost thou kindle thy lamp, and rise early? Why dost thou write so many books? Lest any of us should be deceived about the gods, in supposing that they cared for men, or lest any one should take the essence of the good to be anything else than pleasure. For if these things are so, then lie down and sleep, and live the life of a worm, wherefore thou hast judged thyself fit. Eat and drink and cohabit, and ease thyself and snore. What is it to thee how other men think concerning these matters, whether soundly or unsoundly? What hast thou to do with us? With sheep hast thou some concern, for that they serve us when they are shorn, and when they are milked, and at last when they have their throats cut? Were it not, then, to be desired, if men could be lulled and charmed to slumber by the Stoics, and give themselves to thee, and the like of thee, to be shorn and milked? These things shouldst thou say to thy brother Epicureans, but shouldst thou not keep them hidden from other men, and seek in every way to persuade them, above all things, that we are by nature social, and that temperance is good, in order that everything may be kept for thee? Or should we preserve this fellowship with some, and not with others? With whom then should we preserve it? With those who also preserve it towards us, or those who transgress it? And who transgresses it more than ye, who set forth such doctrines? 4. What, then, was it that roused up Epicurus from his sleep and compelled him to write the things he wrote? What else than nature, the mightiest of all powers in humanity? nature that drags the man, reluctant and groaning, to her will. For saith she, since it seems to thee that there is no fellowship among men, write this down, and deliver it to others, and watch and wait for this, and be thyself, by thine own deed, the accuser of thine own opinions. Shall we, then, say that Orestes was driven by the Furies and aroused from sleep, and did not crueler Furies and avengers rouse this man as he slumbered, and suffered him not to rest, but compelled him, as madness and wine, the priests of Cybele, to proclaim his own evils? So mighty and invincible a thing is man's nature. 5. For how can a vine be affected, and not in the manner of a vine, but of an olive? Or how, again, can an olive be affected not in the manner of an olive, but of a vine? It is impossible. It cannot be conceived. Neither then is it possible for a man wholly to lose the affections of humanity, for even eunuchs cannot cut away for themselves the desires of men. And thus Epicurus has cut away all that belongs to a man as father of a family, and as citizen, and as friend, but the desires of humanity he hath not cut away, for he could not, no more than these pitiful academics are able to cast away or to blind their own perceptions, although this is the thing that they have striven with all their zeal to do. 6. How shameful is this, that a man having received from nature measures and canons for the recognition of truth, should study not to add to them and perfect them where they are wanting, but the very contrary of this. If there be anything that may lead us to the knowledge of the truth, they strive to abolish and destroy it. 7. What sayest thou, philosopher? Religion and holiness, what dost thou take them for? If thou wilt, I shall prove that they are good. So be it. Prove it then, in order that our citizens may be converted and honour the divinity, and be no longer neglectful of the greatest things. Now hast thou received the proofs? I have, and am thankful therefore. 8. Now since thou art exceedingly well pleased with these things, hear the contrary. There are no gods, or if there be, they have no care for men, nor have we any communion with them, and this religion and holiness, whereof the multitude babble, is the lying of impostors and sophists, or of legislators, by Zeus, for the frighting and restraining of evildoers. Well said, philosopher, the citizens shall have much profit of thee. Thou hast already brought back all our youths to the contempt of sacred things. What now? Are these doctrines not pleasing to thee? Learn then that righteousness is nothing, that reverence is folly, that a father is nothing, a son nothing. Well said, philosopher, proceed, persuade the young, that we may multiply the number of those who believe and speak with thee. From these teachings have grown our well-governed states. From these did Sparta spring, and these beliefs, by his laws and discipline, did Lycurgus plant among his people. That slavery is no more base than honourable, nor to be free men more honourable than base. Through these opinions died those who fell at Thermopylae, and through what others did the Athenians forsake their city. 9. Then those who speak such things marry and beget children, and take part in public affairs, and make themselves priests and augurs. Of what? Of beings that do not exist, and they question the Pythian oracle that they may learn falsehoods, and they declare the oracles to others. O monstrous impudence and imposture! End of Against the Epicureans and Academics by Epictetus. Translation Thomas William Ralston.
Apocolocyntosis by Seneca. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Availle in August 2017. Apocolocyntosis, or Ludus de Morte Claudii, the Pumpkinification of Claudius, by Seneca. I wish to place on record the proceedings in heaven October 13 last, of the new year which begins this auspicious age. It shall be done without malice or favour. This is the truth. Ask if you like how I know it. To begin with, I am not bound to please you with my answer. Who will compel me? I know the same day made me free, which was the last day for him who made the proverb true, one must be born either a pharaoh or a fool. If I choose to answer, I will say whatever trips off my tongue. Who has ever made the historian produce a witness to swear for him? But if an authority must be produced, ask of the man who saw Drusilla translated to heaven. The same man will aver he saw Claudius on the road, dot and carry one. Will he, nil he, all that happens in heaven he needs must see. He is the custodian of the Appian way. By that route, you know, both Tiberius and Augustus went up to the gods. Question him. He will tell you the tale when you are alone. Before company, he is dumb. You see, he swore in the Senate that he beheld Drusilla mounting heavenwards, and all he got for his good news was that everybody gave him the lie. Since when, he solemnly swears he will never bear witness again to what he has seen, not even if he had seen a man murdered in open market. What he told me I report plain and clear, as I hope for his health and happiness. Now had the sun with shorter course drawn in his risen light, and by equivalent degrees grew the dark hours of night. Victorious Cynthia now held sway over a wider space. Grim winter drove rich autumn out, and now usurped his place. And now the fiat had gone forth that Bacchus must grow old. The few last clusters of the wine were gathered ere the cold. I shall make myself better understood if I say the month was October, the day was the 13th. What hour it was I cannot certainly tell. Philosophers will agree more often than clocks. But it was between midday and 1 afternoon. Clumsy creature, you say. The poets are not content to describe sunrise and sunset, and now they even disturb the midday siesta. Will you thus neglect so good an hour? Now the sun's chariot had gone by the middle of his way. Half wearily he shook the reins, nearer to night than day, and led the light along the slope that down before him lay. Claudius began to breathe his last, and could not make an end of the matter. Then Mercury, who had always been much pleased with his wit, drew aside one of the 3 fates, and said, Cruel beldam, why do you let the poor wretch be tormented? After all this torture, cannot he have a rest? 64 years it is now since he began to pant for breath. What grudge is this you bear against him and the whole empire? Do let the astrologers tell the truth for once. Since he became emperor, they have never let a year pass, never a month, without laying him out for his burial. Yet it is no wonder if they are wrong, and no one knows his hour. Nobody ever believed he was really quite born. Do what has to be done, kill him, and let a better man rule in empty court. Clotho replied, Upon my word, I did wish to give him another hour or 2 until he should make Roman citizens of the half-dozen who are still outsiders. He made up his mind, you know, to see the whole world in the toga, Greeks, Gauls, Spaniards, Britons, and all. But since it is your pleasure to leave a few foreigners for seed, and since you command me, so be it. She opened her box, and out came 3 spindles. One was for Augurinus, one for Baba, one for Claudius. These 3, she says, I will cause to die within 1 year, and at no great distance apart, and I will not dismiss him unattended. Think of all the thousands of men he was wont to see following after him, thousands going before, thousands all crowding about him, and it would never do to leave him alone on a sudden. These boon companions will satisfy him for the nonce. This said, she twists the thread around his ugly spindle once, snaps off the last bit of the life of that imperial dunce. But Lachesis, her hair adorned, her tresses neatly bound, Piraean laurel on her locks, her brows with garlands crowned, plucks me from out the snowy wool new threads as white as snow, which, handled with a happy touch, change colour as they go. Not common wool, but golden wire, the sister's wondering gaze, as age by age the pretty thread runs down the golden days. World without end they spin away, the happy fleeces pull, what joy they take to fill their hands with that delightful wool. Indeed, the task performs itself, no toil the spinners know. Down drops the soft and silken thread as round the spindles go. Fewer than these are Tithon's years, nor Nestor's life so long. Phoebus is present, glad he is to sing a merry song. Now helps the work, now full of hope upon the harp doth play. The sisters listen to the song that charms their toil away. They praise their brothers' melodies, and still the spindles run, till more than man's allotted span the busy hands have spun. Then Phoebus says, O sister Fates, I pray, take none away, but suffer this one life to be longer than mortal day. Let me in face and lovely grace, like me in voice and song, he'll bid the laws at length speak out that have been dumb so long, will give unto the weary world years prosperous and bright, like as the day-star from on high scatters the stars of night. As when the stars return again, clear Hesper brings his light, or as the ruddy dawn drives out the dark and brings the day, as the bright sun looks on the world and speeds along its way. His rising car from morning gates, so Caesar doth arise, so Nero shows his face to Rome before the people's eyes. His bright and shining countenance illumines all the air, while down upon his graceful neck fall rippling waves of hair. Thus Apollo, but Lachesis, quite as ready to cast a favourable eye on a handsome man, spins away by the handful, and bestows years and years upon Nero out of her own pocket. As for Claudius, they tell everybody to speed him on his way, with cries of joy and solemn litany. At once he bubbled up the ghost, and there was an end to that shadow of a life. He was listening to a troupe of comedians when he died, so you see I have reason to fear those gentry. The last words he was heard to speak in this world were these. When he had made a great noise with that end of him which talketh easiest, he cried out, oh dear, I think I have made a mess of myself. Whether he did or no, I cannot say, but certain it is he always did make a mess of everything. What happened next on earth, it is a mere waste of time to tell, for you know it all well enough, and there is no fear of your ever forgetting the impression which that public rejoicing made on your memory. No one forgets his own happiness. What happened in heaven you shall hear. For proof, please apply to my informant. Word comes to Jupiter that a stranger had arrived, a man well set up, pretty grey. He seemed to be threatening something, for he wagged his head ceaselessly, he dragged the right foot. They asked him what nation he was of. He answered something in a confused, mumbling voice. His language they did not understand. He was no Greek and no Roman, nor of any known race. On this, Jupiter bids Hercules go and find out what country he comes from. You see, Hercules had travelled over the whole world, and might be expected to know all the nations in it. But Hercules, the first glimpse he got, was really much taken aback, although not all the monsters in the world could frighten him. When he saw this new kind of object, with its extraordinary gait and the voice of no terrestrial beast, but such as you might hear in the leviathans of the deep, hoarse and inarticulate, he thought his 13th labour had come upon him. When he looked closer, the thing seemed to be a kind of man. Up he goes then, and says what your Greek finds readiest to his tongue. Who art thou, and what thy people? Who thy parents? Where thy home? Claudius was delighted to find literary men up there, and began to hope there might be some corner for his own historical works. So he caps him with another Homeric verse, explaining that he was Caesar. Breezes wafted me from Ilion unto the Ciconian land. But the next verse was more true and no less Homeric. Thither come, I sacked the city, slew the people, every one. He would have taken in poor simple Hercules, but that Our Lady of Malaria was there, who left her temple and came alone with him. All the other gods he had left at Rome. Quoth she, the fellow's tale is nothing but lies. I have lived with him all these years, and I tell you he was born at Lyons. You behold a fellow burgess of Marcus. As I say, he was born at the 16th milestone from Vienne, a native Gaul. So of course he took Rome, as a good Gaul ought to do. I pledge you my word that in Lyons he was born where Licinius was king so many years. But you that have trudged over more roads than any muleteer that plies for hire, you must have come across the people of Lyons, and you must know that it is a far cry from Xanthus to the Rhone. At this point Claudius flared up, and expressed his wrath with as big a growl as he could manage. What he said nobody understood. As a matter of fact, he was ordering my Lady of Fever to be taken away, and making that sign with his trembling hand, which was always steady enough for that, if for nothing else, by which he used to decapitate men. He had ordered her head to be chopped off. For all the notice the others took of him, they might have been his own freedmen. Then Hercules said, You just listen to me and stop playing the fool. You have come to the place where the mice nibble iron. Out with the truth, and look sharp, or I'll knock your quips and quiddities out of you. Then, to make himself all the more awful, he strikes an attitude, and proceeds in his most tragic vein. Declare with speed what spot you claim by birth, or with this club fall stricken to the earth. This club hath oft-times slaughtered haughty kings. Why mumble unintelligible things? What land, what tribe produced that shaking head? Declare it. On my journey when I sped far to the kingdom of the triple king, and from the main Hesperian did bring the goodly cattle to the Argive town, there I beheld a mountain looking down upon two rivers. This the sun espies, right opposite each day he doth arise. Hence, mighty Rhone, thy rapid torrents flow, and Arar, much in doubt which way to go, ripples along the banks with shallow roll. Say, is this land the nurse that bred thy soul? These lines he delivered with much spirit and a bold front. All the same, he was not quite master of his wits, and had some fear of a blow from the fool. Claudius, seeing a mighty man before him, saw things looked serious, and understood that here he had not quite the same pre-eminence as in Rome, where no one was his equal. The Gallic cock was worth most on his own dunghill. So this is what he was thought to say, as far as could be made out. I did hope, Hercules, bravest of all the gods, that you would take my part with the rest, and if I should need a voucher, I mean to name you who know me so well. Do but call it to mind how it was I used to sit in judgment before your temple whole days together during July and August. You know what miseries I endured there, in hearing the lawyers plead day and night. If you had fallen amongst these, you may think yourself very strong, but you would have found it worse than the sewers of Augeas. I drained more filth than you did. But since I want... Some pages have fallen out in which Hercules must have been persuaded. The gods are now discussing what Hercules tells them. No wonder you have forced your way into the Senate house. No bars or bolts can hold against you. Only do say what species of god you want a fellow to be made. An Epicurean god he cannot be, for they have no troubles and cause none. A Stoic, then? How can he be globular, as Varro says, without a head or any other projection? There is in him something of the Stoic god, as I can see now. He has neither heart nor head. Upon my word, if he had asked this boon from Saturn, he would not have got it, though he kept up Saturn's feast all the year round, a truly Saturnalian prince. A likely thing he will get it from Jove, whom he condemned for incest as far as in him lay, for he killed his son-in-law Silenus, because Silenus had a sister, a most charming girl, called Venus by all the world, and he preferred to call her Juno. Why, says he, I want to know why, his own sister. Read your books, stupid, you may go half-way at Athens, the whole way at Alexandria. Because the mice lick meal at Rome, you say. Is this creature to mend our crooked ways? What goes on in his own closet he knows not, and now he searches the regions of the sky, wants to be a god. Is it not enough that he has a temple in Britain, that savages worship him and pray to him as a god, so that they may find a fool to have mercy upon them? At last it came into Jove's head that while strangers were in the house it was not lawful to speak or debate. My lords and gentlemen, said he, I gave you leave to ask questions, and you have made a regular farmyard of the place. Be so good as to keep the rules of the house. What will this person think of us, whoever he is? So Claudius was led out, and the first to be asked his opinion was Father Janus. He had been made consul-elect for the afternoon of the next 1st of July, being as shrewd a man as you could find on a summer's day, for he could see, as they say, before and behind. He made an eloquent harangue, because his life was passed in the forum, but too fast for the notary to take down. This is why I give no full report of it, for I don't want to change the words he used. He said a great deal of the majesty of the gods, and how the honour ought not to be given away to every Tom, Dick, or Harry. Once, said he, it was a great thing to become a god. Now you have made it a farce. Therefore, that you may not think I am speaking against one person instead of the general custom, I propose that from this day forward the godhead be given to none of those who eat the fruits of the earth, or whom Mother Earth doth nourish. After this bill has been read a 3rd time, whosoever is made, said, or portrayed to be God, I vote he be delivered over to the bogies, and at the next public show be flogged with a birch amongst the new gladiators. The next to be asked was Dicebiter, son of VfkaBT. He also being consul-elect and a money-lender, by his trade he made a living, used to sell rights of citizenship in a small way. Hercules trips me up to him daintily, and tweaks him by the ear. So he uttered his opinion in these words. Inasmuch as the blessed Claudius is akin to the blessed Augustus, and also to the blessed Augusta, his grandmother, whom he ordered to be made a goddess, and whereas he far surpasses all mortal men in wisdom, and seeing that it is for the public good that there be someone able to join Romulus in devouring boiled turnips, I propose that from this day forth blessed Claudius be a god, to enjoy that honour with all its appurtenances in as full a degree as any other before him, and that a note to that effect be added to Ovid's Metamorphoses. The meeting was divided, and it looked as though Claudius was to win the day. For Hercules saw his iron was in the fire, trotted here and trotted there, saying, "Don't deny me, I make a point of the matter. I'll do as much for you again when you like. You roll my log, and I'll roll yours. One hand washes another." Then arose the blessed Augustus when his turn came, and spoke with much eloquence. "I call you to witness, my lords and gentlemen," said he, "that since the day I was made a god I have never uttered one word. I always mind my own business. But now I can keep on the mask no longer, nor conceal the sorrow which shame makes all the greater. Is it for this I have made peace by land and sea? For this have I calmed intestine wars? For this laid a firm foundation of law for Rome, adorned it with buildings and all that? My lords, words fail me, there are none can rise to the height of my indignation. I must borrow that saying of the eloquent Messala Corvinus, I am ashamed of my authority. This man, my lords, who looks as though he could not hurt a fly, used to chop off heads as easily as a dog sits down. But why should I speak of all those men, and such men? There is no time to lament for public disasters when one has so many private sorrows to think of. I leave that therefore, and say only this, for even if my sister knows no Greek, I do. The knee is nearer than the shin. This man you see, who for so many years has been masquerading under my name, has done me the favour of murdering 2 Julias, great-granddaughters of mine, one by cold steel and one by starvation, and one great-grandson, L. Silenus. See, Jupiter, whether he had a case against him. At least it is your own, if you will be fair. Come, tell me, blessed Claudius, why of all those you killed, both men and women, without a hearing, why did you not hear their side of the case first, before putting them to death? Where do we find that custom? It is not done in heaven. Look at Jupiter. All these years he has been king, and never did more than once to break Vulcan's leg, whom seizing by the foot he cast from the threshold of the sky. And once he fell in a rage with his wife and strung her up. Did he do any killing? You killed Messalina, whose great uncle I was no less than yours. I don't know, did you say? Curse you, that is just it. Not to know was worse than to kill. Caligula he went on persecuting even when he was dead. Caligula murdered his father-in-law, Claudius his son-in-law to boot. Caligula would not have Crassus's son called great. Claudius gave him his name back and took away his head. In one family he destroyed Crassus, Magnus, Scribonia, the Tristionias, Assario, noble though they were. Crassus indeed such a fool that he might have been emperor. Is this he you want now to make a god? Look at his body, born under the wrath of heaven. In fine, let him say the 3 words quickly, and he may have me for a slave. God! Who will worship this God? Who will believe in him? While you make gods of such as he, no one will believe you to be gods. To be brief, my lords, if I have lived honourably among you, if I have ever given plain speech to any, avenge my wrongs. This is my motion. Then he read out his amendment which he had committed to writing. Inasmuch as the blessed Claudius murdered his father-in-law Appius Silanus, his two sons-in-law Pompeius Magnus and L. Silanus, Crassius Frugi his daughter's father-in-law, as like him as two eggs in a basket, Scribonia his daughter's mother-in-law, his wife Messalina, and others too numerous to mention, I propose that strong measures be taken against him, that he be allowed no delay of process, that immediate sentence of banishment be passed on him, that he be deported from heaven within 30 days, and from Olympus within 30 hours. This motion was passed without further debate. Not a moment was lost. Mercury screwed his neck and haled him to the lower regions, to that bourne from which they say no traveller returns. As they passed downwards along the sacred way, Mercury asked what was that great concourse of men. Could it be Claudius's funeral? It was certainly a most gorgeous spectacle, got up regardless of expense. Clear it was that a god was being borne to the grave. Tootling of flutes, roaring of horns, an immense brass band of all sorts, such a din that even Claudius could hear it. Joy and rejoicing on every side, the Roman people walking about like free men. Agatho and a few pettifoggers were weeping for grief, and for once in a way they meant it. The barristers were crawling out of their dark corners, pale and thin, with hardly a breath in their bodies, as though just coming to life again. One of them, when he saw the pettifoggers putting their heads together and lamenting their sad lot, up comes he and says, "Did not I tell you the Saturnalia could not last forever?" When Claudius saw his own funeral train, he understood that he was dead. For they were chanting his dirge in Anapiests, with much mopping and mouthing. Pour forth your laments, your sorrow declare, let the sounds of grief rise high in the air, for he that is dead had a wit most keen, was bravest of all that on earth have been. Race-horses are nothing to his swift feet, rebellious Parthians he did defeat. Swift after the Persians his light shafts go, for he well knew how to fit arrow to bow. Swiftly the striped barbarians fled, with one little wound he shot them dead. And the Britons beyond in their unknown seas, blue-shielded Brigantians too, all these he chained by the neck as the Romans' slaves. He spake, and the ocean with trembling waves accepted the axe of the Roman law. Oh, weep for the man, this world never saw one quicker a troublesome suit to decide, when only one part of the case had been tried. He could do it indeed, and not hear either side. Who'll now sit in judgment the whole year round? Now he that is judge of the shades underground, once ruler of 50 cities in Crete, must yield to his better and take a back seat. Mourn, mourn, pettifoggers, ye venal crew, and you minor poets, woe, woes to you, and you above all who get rich quick by the rattle of dice and the 3-card trick. Claudius was charmed to hear his own praises sung, and would have stayed longer to see the show. But the Thalthybius of the gods laid a hand on him and led him across the Campus Martius, first wrapping his head up close that no one might know him, until betwixt Tiber and the subway he went down to the lower regions. His freedman Narcissus had gone down before him by a short cut, ready to welcome his master. Out he comes to meet him, smooth and shining, he had just left the bath, and says he, "What make the gods among mortals?" "Look alive," says Mercury. "Go and tell them we are coming." Away he flew, quicker than tongue can tell. It is easy going by that road, all downhill. So although he had a touch of the gout, in a trice they were come to Dis's door. There lay Cerberus, or, as Horace puts it, the 100-headed monster. Claudius was a trifle perturbed — it was a little white bitch he used to keep for a pet — when he spied this black shag-haired hound, not at all the kind of thing you could wish to meet in the dark. In a loud voice he cried, "Claudius is coming!" All marched before him, singing, "The lost is found, oh, let us rejoice together." Here we found C. Silius, consul-elect, Juncus the ex-praetor, Sextus Trollus, M. Helvius, Trogus, Cotta, Vettius Valens, Fabius, Roman knights whom Narcissus had ordered for execution. In the midst of this chanting company was Mnester the mime, whom Claudius for honour's sake had made shorter by a head. The news was soon blown about that Claudius had come. To Messalina they throng, first his freedmen, Polybius, Myron, Harpocras, Amphias, Pharonactus, all sent before him by Claudius that he might not be unattended anywhere. Next 2 prefects, Justus Catonius and Rufrius Pollio, then his friends, Saturnius, Lucius and Pedopompeius and Lupus and Sailor Asinius, these of consular rank. Last came his brother's daughter, his sister's daughter, sons-in-law, fathers and mothers-in-law, the whole family, in fact. In a body they came to meet Claudius, and when Claudius saw them, he exclaimed, "Friends everywhere, on my word! How came you all here?" To these Pedopompeius answered, "What, cruel man? How came we here? Who but you sent us, the murderer of all the friends that you ever had? To court with you, I'll show you where their lordship sits." Pedo brings him before the judgment seat of Aeacus, who was holding court under the Lex Cornelia to try cases of murder and assassination. Pedo requests the judge to take the prisoner's name and produces a summons with this charge: Senators killed, 35. Roman knights, 221. Others as the sands of the seashore for multitude. Claudius finds no counsel. At length out steps P. Petronius, an old chum of his, a finished scholar in the Claudian tongue, and claims a remand. Not granted. Pedopompeius prosecutes with loud outcry. The counsel for the defense tries to reply, but Aeacus, who is the soul of justice, will not have it. Aeacus hears the case against Claudius, refuses to hear the other side, and passes sentence against him, quoting the line, "As he did, so be he done by. This is justice undefiled." A great silence fell. Not a soul but was stupefied at this new way of managing matters. They had never known anything like it before. It was no new thing to Claudius, yet he thought it unfair. There was a long discussion as to the punishment he ought to endure. Some said that Sisyphus had done his job of porterage long enough. Tantalus would be dying of thirst if he were not relieved. The drag must be put at last on wretched Ixion's wheel. But it was determined not to let off any of the old stages, lest Claudius should dare to hope for any such relief. It was agreed that some new punishment must be devised. They must devise some new task, something senseless, to suggest some craving without result. Then Aeacus decreed he should rattle dice for ever in a box with no bottom. At once the poor wretch began his fruitless task of hunting for the dice, which for ever slipped from his fingers. For when he rattled with the box and thought he now had got 'em, the little cubes would vanish through the perforated bottom. Then he would pick 'em up again, and once more set a-trying. The dice but served him the same trick, away they went a-flying. So still he tries, and still he fails, still searching long he lingers, and every time the tricky things go slipping through his fingers. Just so when Sisyphus at last once gets there with his boulder, he finds the labor all in vain, it rolls down off his shoulder. All on a sudden, who should turn up but Caligula, and claims the man for a slave, brings witnesses who said they had seen him being flogged, caned, fisticuffed by him. He is handed over to Caligula, and Caligula makes him a present to Aeacus. Aeacus delivers him to his freedman Menander, to be his law clerk. End of Apocolocyntosis by Seneca.
The Circular Snare, from Spiders, by Cecil Warburton, a Cambridge Manual of Science and Literature. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Circular Snare. Select the most perfect circular snare at hand and examine it attentively. In the autumn, when the large garden spider, Epicureans diademata, is mature, it will probably be easy to find such a snare a foot or more in diameter. It is stretched within an irregular frame of foundation lines of extra thickness and strength, and consists of a large number of radii or spokes connected by what appears to be a series of concentric circles, in reality a continuous spiral, like the hairspring of a watch. The central portion is different from the rest of the wheel. Probably in the very center there is a vacant space, and round this a hub, consisting of a spiral line different in appearance from that of the main spiral. It does not leave a radius exactly at the point where it strikes it, and the rather zigzag effect has caused it to be known as the notched zone. Touch the web, and it adheres to the finger, but all its lines are not adhesive. Test this with some fine-pointed implement, and the foundation lines, the radii, and the notched zone will give negative effects. The spiral line alone is viscid, and its viscidity is due to the presence of thousands of little beads of gummy matter strung on a thin elastic thread. The vast number and uniformity of these beads, estimated at 120,000 on a large web, excited the wonder and admiration of naturalists until it was proved that they were not deposited by the spider as beads at all, but as a uniform coating of viscid matter, which subsequently arranged itself into equidistant globules, easily explicable by the physicist. Indeed, precisely the same phenomenon is seen on a dew-laden web, where similar but very much larger beads of water decorate all the lines. From the hub of the wheel we shall very likely notice a rather stout cable diverging from the plane of the snare and leading to a nest of leaves spun together. Here the spider is to be found when not on duty in the center of the wheel, and here it constructs its egg cocoons. This, then, is the complete circular snare, but we shall understand it much better if we watch the spider at work in its construction. The first business of the spider is to lay down the foundation lines. Any sort of trapezium, or even a triangle if large enough, in a more or less vertical plane will suffice, and under some circumstances the operation is simple enough. The spider attaches a line at the point of departure and crawls along, spinning as it goes and holding up the newly spun thread by the claws of one of its hind feet, till it reaches a suitable spot for its furthest limit. It then hauls in the slack and makes it fast. It will probably return along the line thus laid down, still spinning, to the starting point, thus doubling the strength of the cable, and indeed a large spider will often repeat this operation several times. Now the upper boundary of the future web is secured. It is next necessary to find points of attachment for the lower boundary, and the spider either drops or climbs down, always carrying a line, from one of the ends of the upper line till it reaches a spot suitable for its purpose, and the previous performance is repeated. If there is any difficulty about a fourth attachment, it is always open to the spider to climb back along the two lines already laid down, and by carrying a loose line with it, to secure at all events a triangular framework. This framework, whether trapezoid or triangular, will be reinforced several times and made thoroughly trustworthy before the work of making the actual snare is proceeded with. Now, the foregoing operation is obviously perfectly simple in certain cases, as, for instance, when a spider has chosen a lattice work or the mouth of an empty barrel as its pitch. But snares may easily be found in situations where such a mode of procedure seems impossible. In a pine forest, for example, one may see huge webs stretched at a great height from the ground between boles 10 feet apart, or one may find such a snare spread across a stream at a spot where the trees on either side do not intermingle their boughs. How, in such cases, does the spider accomplish its purpose? There is little doubt that, whenever practicable, the spider walks round, sometimes crawling quite an astounding distance, but that it can, at need, resort to another method is easily proved by a very simple experiment in the house. Fill any vessel, a basin or a bath, with water, and arrange an upright post in the middle, placing a spider upon it. If the air in the room is absolutely still, the captive is powerless to escape, but if draughts are present, it will sooner or later disappear, and it accomplishes this feat by emitting a thread which, caught by the air current, is drawn out from its spinnerets till it by and by becomes entangled in the surrounding furniture. This power of emitting silk to some little distance and allowing the wind to draw it out is, as we shall see, frequently exercised in the early life of many spiders. The foundation lines, which may thus have given the spider great trouble to secure, are of extreme importance to it, and may serve for several snares in succession. There is little hesitation or delay about the subsequent operations. The spokes of the wheel are readily formed by carrying lines across to opposite points of the framework, and uniting them where they intersect. They are laid down in no special order, but more or less alternation is generally noticeable, apparently for the purpose of keeping the tension equally balanced, and the spider will occasionally desist in order to go and brace up the framework with additional stays, which generally have the effect of converting it to a polygon. Before long, the requisite number of fairly equidistant spokes or radii are visible, and then the spider, starting from the center, rapidly spins a spiral thread consisting of a few coils only to the circumference, stepping from spoke to spoke. This is only a temporary scaffolding and will not be suffered to remain in the completed snare. If the structure is touched at this stage of the operations, it does not adhere to the finger. The viscid spiral remains to be laid down. Though it does not hesitate for a moment, the spider now works with a peculiar deliberation, but the operation will be much better understood by actual observation than by any amount of description, and we shall only recommend the reader to note that the new spiral is exceedingly elastic, and that at the moment of its attachment to a spoke it is stretched and let go like the string of a bow. The spider seems carefully to avoid treading on it as it proceeds, utilizing the non-viscid spiral scaffolding already described. A little attention to the center of the wheel, and the snare is complete. Some species of Epeira entirely remove the center, leaving a circular empty space, while others fill it in with an irregular network of threads. How does the garden spider avoid getting caught in its own web? We have shown that there are many lines which are not viscid, and no doubt these are utilized as far as possible, but it can hardly happen that the spider never touches adhesive portions of the web with legs or body. Possibly some explanation is furnished by an ingenious experiment which Fabre performed. He found that a glass rod, lightly smeared with oil, did not adhere to the viscid spiral, neither did a leg freshly taken from a garden spider unless allowed to remain in contact for a considerable time. When, however, this leg had been washed with bisulfide of carbon, which dissolves any kind of oily substance, it adhered at once. It would seem likely, therefore, that the legs and body of the spider itself are protected by some oily exudation from any danger of adherence to its own lines. End of The Circular Snare, from Spiders by Cecil Warburton, A Cambridge Manual of Science and Literature, 1912. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.
The Community Masque as a Substitute for War by Robert Benchley. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. The Community Masque as a Substitute for War by Robert Benchley. With war and liquor removed from the list of what's going on this week, how will mankind spend the long summer evenings? Some advocate another war. Others recommend a piece of yeast in a glass of grape juice. The effect is said to be equally devastating. But there is a new school, led by Percy Mackay, which brings forward a scheme for occupying the spare time of the world, which has, at least, the savor of novelty. It presents the Community Masque as a substitute for war. Whenever a neighborhood or county feels the old craving for bloodletting and gas bombing coming on, a town meeting is to be called and plans drawn up for the presentation of a masque entitled Democracy, or From Chrysalis to Butterfly. In this simple way, one and all will be kept out in the open air and will get to know each other better, thus relieving their bellicose cravings right there on the village green, among themselves, without dragging a foreign nation into the mess at all. The slogan is, "Fight your neighbors first. Why go abroad for war?" The community masque idea is all right in itself. There certainly can be no harm in dressing up to represent the three-platoon system, or the spirit of machinery, and reciting free verse to the effect that "I am the three-platoon system, firemen I represent," and the clash and clang of the hook and ladder company. No one could find fault with that, provided that those taking part in the thing do so of their own free will, and understand what they are doing. The trouble with the community masque is not so much with the masque as with the community. For while the masque may be a five-star sporting extra hot from the presses of Percy Mackay, the community is the same old community that has been getting together for inter-Sunday school track meets and wig and footlight club amateur theatricals for years and years, and the result has always been the same. Let us say, for instance, that the community of Wimblehurst begins to feel the lack of a good rousing war to keep the ladies' guild and the men over 35 busy. What could be more natural than to call in Mr. Mackay and say, "What have you got in the way of a nice masque for a suburban district containing many socially possible people? and others who might do very well in it. Ensemble work. Something entitled The March of Civilization is selected, because it calls for Boy Scout uniforms and a Goddess of Liberty costume, all of which are on hand, together with lots of Red Cross regalia left over from the war drives. The plot of the thing concerns the adventures of the young girl, Civilization, who leaves her home in the Neolithic period, accompanied only by her faithful old nurse, Language, and Language's little children, the vowels and the consonants. She is followed all the way from the Neolithic age to the present time by the evil spirit, Indigestion, but thanks to the helpful offices of the spirits of capillary attraction and indestructibility of matter, she overcomes all obstacles and reaches her goal, the League of Nations, at last. But during the course of her wanderings, there have been all kinds of subplots which bring the element of suspense into the thing. For instance, it seems that this person in Digestion has found out something about Civilization's father, which gives him the upper hand over the girl, and he, together with the two gunmen, Heat and Humidity, arrange all kinds of traps for the poor thing to fall into. But she takes counsel with the kind old lady, Self-Determination of Peoples, and is considerably helped by the low comedy character, Obesity, who always appears at just the right moment. So, in the end, there is a big ensemble, involving Boy Scouts, representatives of those allies who happen to be in good standing in that particular month, 7 boys and girls personifying the 12 months of the year, Red Cross workers, the Mayor's Committee of Welcome, a selection of major prophets, children typifying the 10 different ways of cooking an egg, and the all-pervading spirit of the Post Office Department, seated on a dais in the rear and watching over the assemblage with kindly eyes and an armful of bricks. This, then, is in brief outline the March of Civilization, selected for presentation by the Community Council of Wimblehurst. It is to be done on the edge of the woods which line the golf course, and, on paper, the thing shapes up rather well. Considerable hard feeling arises, however, over the choice of the children to play the parts of the vowels and the consonants. It is, of course, not possible to have all the vowels and consonants represented, as they would flutter up the stage and might prove unwieldy in the allegretto passages. A compromise is therefore effected by personifying only the more graceful ones, like S and the lower case f. And this means that a certain discrimination must be used in selecting the actors. It also means that a great many little girls are going to be disappointed and their mothers' feelings outraged. Little Alice Withstanley is chosen to play the part of the Craft Guild movement in industry, showing the rise of cooperation and unity among the working classes. She is chosen because she has blonde hair, which can be arranged in braids down her back, obviously essential to a proper representation of industrial teamwork as a moving force in the world's progress. It so happens, however, that the daughter of the man who is cast for Humidity has had her eyes on this ingenue part ever since the printed text was circulated and had virtually been promised it by the head of house committee of the country club, through whose kindness the grounds were to be used for the performance. There is a heated discussion over the merits of the two contestants between Mrs. Withstanley and the mother of the betrayed girl, which results in the withdrawal of the latter's offer to furnish Turkish rugs for the Oriental decadence scene. Following this, the rougher element of the community, enlisted to take part in the scenes showing the building of the pyramids and the first battle of Bull Run, appear at one of the early rehearsals in a state of Bolshevik upheaval, protesting against the unjust ruling which makes them attend all rehearsals and wait around on the side hill until their scenes are on, keeping them inactive sometimes from 2 to 3 hours, according to the finish with which the principals get through the prologue and opening scenes showing the creation. the proletariat present an ultimatum, saying that the committee in charge can either shorten their waiting hours or remove the restrictions on crap shooting on the side hill during the periods of inaction. There is a meeting of the director and his assistants, who elect a delegation to confer with the striking legionnaires, with the result that no compromise is reached. The Soviet withdraws from the Masque in a body, threatening to set fire to the grass on the first night of the performance. During the rehearsals, the husband of the woman who is portraying Winter Wheat is found wandering along the brookside with her sister cereal Spring Wheat, which of course makes further polite cooperation between these two staples impossible, and the dance of the foodstuffs has to be abandoned at the last moment. This adds to the general tension. 3 nights before the first performance, the director calls everyone to a meeting in the trophy room of the clubhouse and says that, so far as he is concerned, the show is off. He has given up his time to come out here, night after night, in an attempt to put on a masque that will be a credit to the community and a significant event in the world of art. And what has he found? Indifference, irresponsibility, lack of cooperation, non-attendance at rehearsals, and a spirit of laissez-faire, in the face of which it is impossible to produce a successful masque. Consideration for his own reputation, as well as that of the township, makes it necessary for him to throw the whole thing over, here and now. The chairman of the committee then gets up and cries a little and says that he is sure that if everyone agrees to pull together during these last 3 days and to attend rehearsals faithfully and to try to get plenty of sleep, Mr. Parsley, the coach, will consent to help them through with the performance. And he asks everyone who is willing to cooperate to say "aye." Everyone says "aye," and Mr. Parsley is won over. As for the masque itself, it is given, of course, and as most of the able-bodied people of the community are taking part, the audience is composed chiefly of the aged and the infirm, who catch muscular rheumatism from sitting out of doors and are greatly bored, except during those scenes when their relatives are taking part. The masque is hailed as a great success, however, in spite of the fact that the community has been disrupted and social life made impossible until the next generation grows up and agrees to let bygones be bygones. But as a substitute for war, it has no equal. End of The Community Masque as a Substitute for War by Robert Benchley.
The Cylindrical Silo. Excerpts from Modern Silage Methods by the Silver Manufacturing Company, Salem, Ohio, 1911. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. While the silo, in one form or another, dates back to antiquity, it was not until the latter part of the 1870s that the building of silos intended for manufacture of silage began in this country. In 1882, the United States Department of Agriculture could find only 91 farmers in this country who used silos. During the last 25 years, however, silos have gradually become general in all sections of the country where dairying and stock raising are important industries. It is likely, if a census were taken on the number of silos in this country today, that we would find between 1/2 and 3/4 of a million of them. The silo is today considered a necessity on thousands of dairy farms, and we find most of them in the states that rank first as dairy states, that is, New York, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, etc. The farmers that have had most experience with silage are the most enthusiastic advocates of the siloing system, and the testimony of intelligent dairymen all over the country is strongly in favor of the silo. Said a New York farmer recently in one of our main agricultural papers, "I would as soon try to farm without a barn as without a silo." The first kind of silos built in this country or abroad were simply holes or pits in the ground, into which the fodder was dumped, and the pit was then covered with a layer of dirt, and sometimes at least weighted with planks and stones. Then, when it was found that a large proportion of the feed would spoil by this crude method, separate silo structures were built, first of stone and later on of wood, brick, or cement. As previously stated, the first separate silos built were rectangular, shallow structures with a door opening at one end. The silos of the French pioneer siloist Auguste Goffard were about 16 feet high and 40 by 16 feet at the bottom. Another French silo built about 50 years ago was 206 times 21½ feet and 15 feet deep, holding nearly 1,500 tons of silage. Silos of a similar type, but of smaller dimensions, were built in this country in the early stages of silo building. Experience has taught siloists that it was necessary to weight the fodder heavily in these silos in order to avoid the spoiling of large quantities of silage. In Goffard's silos, boards were thus placed on top of the siloed fodder, and the mass was weighted at the rate of 100 pounds per square foot. It was found, however, after some time, that this heavy weighing could be dispensed with by making the silos deep, and gradually the deep silos came more and more into use. These silos were first built in this country in the latter part of the 1880s. At the present time none but silos at least 20 to 24 feet deep are built, no matter of what form or material they are made, and most silos built are at least 24 to 30 feet deep or more. Since 1892, the cylindrical form of silos has become more and more general. These silos have the advantage over all other kinds in point of cost and convenience, as well as quality of the silage obtained. We shall later on have an occasion to refer to the relative cost of the various forms of silos, and shall here only mention a few points in favor of the round silos. 1. Round silos can be built cheaper than square ones, because it takes less lumber per cubic foot capacity, and because lighter material may be used in their construction. The sills and studdings here do no work except to support the roof, since the lining acts as a hoop to prevent spreading of the walls. 2. One of the essentials in silo building is that there shall be a minimum of surface and wall exposure of the silage, as both the cost and the danger from losses through spoiling are thereby reduced. The round silos are superior to all other forms in regard to this point. 3. Silage of all kinds will usually begin to spoil after a few days if left exposed to the air. Hence the necessity of considering the extent of surface exposure of silage in the silo while it is being fed out. In a deep silo there is less silage exposed to the surface layer in proportion to the contents than in a shallow one. Experience has taught us that if silage is fed down at a rate slower than 1.2 inches daily, molding is liable to set in. About 2 inches of the top layer of the silage should be fed out daily during cold weather in order to prevent the silage from spoiling. In warm weather, about 3 inches must be taken off daily. If a deeper layer of silage can be fed off daily, there will be less waste of food materials. Some farmers thus plan to feed off 5 or 6 inches of silage daily. The form of the silo must therefore be planned according to the size of the herd, with special reference to this point. Professor King estimates that there should be a feeding surface in the silo of about 5 square feet per cow in the herd. A herd of 30 cows will then require 150 square feet of feeding surface, or the inside diameter of the silo should be 14 feet. For a herd of 40 cows, a silo with a diameter of 16 feet will be required. For 50 cows, a diameter of 18 feet. For 100 cows, a diameter of 25 1/4 feet, etc. End of the Cylindrical Silo. Excerpts from Modern Silage Methods by the Silver Manufacturing Company, Salem, Ohio, 1911. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.
Did We Eat One Another? By Ambrose Bierce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There is no doubt of it. The unwelcome truth has been long suppressed by interested parties who find their account in playing sycophant to that self-satisfied tyrant modern man, but to the impartial philosopher it is as plain as the nose upon the elephant's face that our ancestors ate one another. The custom of the Fiji Islanders, which is their only stock in trade, their only claim to notoriety, is a relic of barbarism, but it is a relic of our barbarism. Man is naturally a carnivorous animal. That none but greengrocers will dispute. That he was formerly less vegetarian in his diet than at present is clear from the fact that market gardening increases in the ratio of civilization. So we may safely assume that at some remote period man subsisted on an exclusively flesh diet. Our uniform vanity has given us the human mind as the acme of intelligence, the human face and figure as the standard of beauty. Of course, we cannot deny to human fat and lean an equal superiority over beef, mutton, and pork. It is plain that our meat-eating ancestors would think in this way, and being unrestrained by the mawkish sentiment attendant on high civilization, would act habitually on the obvious suggestion. A priori, therefore, it is clear that we ate ourselves. Philology is about the only thread that connects us with the prehistoric past. By picking up and piecing together the scattered remnants of language, we form a patchwork of wondrous design and significance. Consider the derivation of the word sarcophagus, and see if it be not suggestive of potted meats. Observe the significance of the phrase "sweet 16." What a world of meaning lurks in the expression, "she is as sweet as a peach." And how suggestive of luncheon are the words "tender youth." A kiss is but a modified bite, and a fond mother, when she says her babe is almost good enough to eat, merely shows that she is herself only a trifle too good to eat it. These evidences might be multiplied ad infinitum, but if enough has been said to induce one human being to revert to the diet of his forefathers, the object of this essay is accomplished. 1868. End of Did We Eat One Another? By Ambrose Bierce. Read by John N. Daly.
Theodicy by Freiherr von Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Excerpt from Preliminary Dissertation on the Conformity of Faith with Reason, published in 1710, section 6 through 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 6. The question of the conformity of faith with reason has always been a great problem. In the primitive church, the ablest Christian authors adapted themselves to the idea of the Platonists, which were the most acceptable to them, and were at the time most generally in favor. Little by little Aristotle took the place of Plato, when the taste for systems began to prevail, and when theology itself became more systematic, owing to the decisions of the general councils, which provided precise and formative formularies. St. Augustine, Boethius, and Cassiodorus in the West, and St. John of Damascus in the East, contributed most towards reducing theology to scientific form, not to mention Bede, Alcuin, St. Anselm, and other theologians versed in philosophy. Finally came the schoolmen, the leisure of the cloisters giving full scope for speculation, which was assisted by Aristotle's philosophy translated from the Arabic. There was formed at last a compound of theology and philosophy, wherein most of the questions arose from the trouble that was taken to reconcile faith with reason. But this had not met with the full success hoped for, because theology had been much corrupted by the unhappiness of the times, by ignorance and obstinacy. Moreover, philosophy, in addition to its own faults, which were very great, found itself burdened with those of theology, which in its turn was suffering from association with a philosophy that was very obscure and very imperfect. One must confess, notwithstanding, with the incomparable Grotius, that there is sometimes gold hidden under the rubbish of the monks' barbarous Latin. I have therefore ofttimes wished that a man of talent, whose office had necessitated his learning of language of the schoolmen, had chosen to extract thence whatever is of worth, and that another Pateau or Thomasius had done in respect of the schoolmen what these two learned men have done in respect of the fathers. It would be a very curious work, and very important for ecclesiastical history. It would continue the history of dogmas up to the time of the revival of letters, owing to which the aspects of things have changed, and even beyond that point. For sundry dogmas, such as those of physical determination, of mediate knowledge, philosophical sin, objective precisions, and many other dogmas in speculative theology, and even in the practical theology of cases of conscience, came into currency even after the Council of Trent. 7. A little before these changes, and before the great schism in the West that still endures, there was in Italy a sect of philosophers which disputed this conformity of faith with reason which I maintain. They were dubbed Averroists, because they were adherents of a famous Arab author who was called the commentator by preeminence, and who appeared to be the one of all his race that penetrated furthest into Aristotle's meaning. This commentator, extending what Greek expositors had already taught, maintained that according to Aristotle, and even according to reason, and at that time the two were considered almost identical, there was no case for the immortality of the soul. Here is his reasoning. The human kind is eternal, according to Aristotle. Therefore, if individual souls die not, one must resort to the metempsychosis rejected by the philosopher. Or if there were always new souls, one must admit the infinity of the souls existing from all eternity. But actual infinity is impossible, according to the doctrine of the same Aristotle. Therefore it is a necessary conclusion that the souls, that is, the forms of organic bodies, must perish with the bodies, or at least this must happen to the passive understanding that belongs to each one individually. Thus there will only remain the active understanding common to all men, which according to Aristotle comes from outside, and which must work wheresoever the organs are suitably disposed, even as the wind produces a kind of music when it is blown into properly adjusted organ pipes. 8. Nothing could have been weaker than this would-be proof. It is not true that Aristotle refuted metempsychosis, or that he proved the eternity of the human kind. And after all, it is quite untrue that an actual infinity is impossible. Yet this proof passed as irresistible among Aristotelians, and induced in them the belief that there was a certain sublunary intelligence, and that our active intelligence was produced by participation in it. But others, who adhered less to Aristotle, went so far as to advocate a universal soul forming the ocean of all individual souls, and believed this universal soul alone capable of subsisting, whilst individual souls are born and die. According to this opinion, the souls of animals are born by being separated like drops from their oceans when they find a body which they can animate, and they die by being reunited to the ocean of souls when the body is destroyed, as streams are lost in the sea. Many even went so far as to believe that God is that universal soul, although others thought that this soul was subordinate and created. This bad doctrine is very ancient and apt to dazzle the common herd. It is expressed in these beautiful lines of Virgil, Aeneid, Book 6, verse 724, written in Latin, and again elsewhere, Virgil, Gorgics, Book 4, verse 221, again written in Latin. 9. Plato's soul of the world has been taken in this sense by some, but there is more indication that the Stoics succumbed to that universal soul which swallows all the rest. Those of this opinion might be called Monophysites, since according to them there is in reality only one soul that subsists. M. Bernier observes that this is an opinion almost universally accepted amongst scholars in Persia and in the states of the Grand Mogul. It appears even that it has gained a footing with the Kabbalists and with the mystics. A certain German of Swabian birth converted to Judaism some years ago, who taught under the name of Moses Germanus, having adopted the dogmas of Spinoza, believed that Spinoza revived the ancient Kabbalah of the Hebrews. And a learned man who confuted this proselyte Jew appears to be of the same opinion. It is known that Spinoza recognizes only substance in the world, whereof individual souls are but transient modifications. Valentin Weigel, pastor at Sockpau in Saxony, a man of wit, even of excessive wit, although people would have it that he was a visionary, was perhaps to some extent of that opinion, as was also a man known as Johann Angelus Silesius, author of certain quite pleasing little devotional verses in German, in the form of epigrams, which have just been reprinted. In general, the mystics' doctrine of deification was liable to such a sinister interpretation. Gerson has already written opposing Ruysbroek, a mystical writer whose intention was evidently good and whose expressions were excusable, but it would be better to write in a manner which has no need of excuses. Although I confess that oft times expressions which are extravagant, and as it were poetical, have greater force to move and to persuade than correct forms of statement. 10. The annihilation of all that belongs to us in our own right, carried to great lengths by the Quietists, might equally well be veiled irreligion in certain minds, as is related, for example, concerning the Quietism of Fo, originator of a great Chinese sect. After having preached his religion for 40 years, when he felt death was approaching, he declared to his disciples that he had hidden the truth from them under the veil of metaphors, and that all reduced itself to nothingness, which he said was the first source of all things. That was still worse, so it would seem, than the opinion of the Averroists. Both of these doctrines are indefensible and even extravagant. Nevertheless, some moderns have made no difficulty about adopting this one and universal soul that engulfs the rest. It has met with only too much applause amongst the so-called free thinkers, and M. de Preciac, a soldier and man of wit, who dabbled in philosophy, at one time aired it publicly in his discourses. The system of pre-established harmony is the one best qualified to cure this evil, for it shows that there are of necessity substances which are simple and without extension, scattered throughout all nature, that these substances must subsist independently of every other except God, and that they are never wholly separated from organic body. Those who believe that souls capable of feeling but incapable of reason are mortal, or who maintain that none but reasoning souls can have feeling, offer a handle to the monopsychites. For it will ever be difficult to persuade men that beasts feel nothing. And once the admission has been made that that which is capable of feeling can die, it is difficult to found upon reason a proof of the immortality of our own souls. End of Theodicy, published in 1710 by Ferrer von Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Excerpt from Preliminary Dissertation on the Conformity of Faith with Reason, sections 6 through 10.
The Fate of Sir John Franklin by John Ray. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The veil that so long concealed from our view the fate of Sir John Franklin and others of our gallant countrymen, engaged in the arduous and hazardous task of exploring the polar seas, has suddenly and unexpectedly lifted, presenting a spectacle painfully distressing. On Sunday last, October 22nd, Dr. Ray of the Hudson's Bay Company arrived in England from the Arctic regions, where he had been deputed to the survey of the western coast of Boothia, and in the prosecution of this engagement became possessed of the melancholy facts recorded below. The following is Dr. Ray's report to the Secretary of the Admiralty. Repulse Bay, July 29. Sir, I have the honour to mention, for the information of my Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, that during my journey over the ice and snow this spring, with the view of completing the survey of the west shore of Boothia, I met with Eskimo in Pelly Bay, from one of whom I learned that a party of white men, Kabloonans, had perished from want of food some distance to the westward, and not far beyond a large river containing many falls and rapids. Subsequently, further particulars were received, and a number of articles purchased, which places the fate of a portion, if not all of the then survivors of Sir John Franklin's long-lost party, beyond a doubt, a fate as terrible as the imagination can conceive. The substance of the information obtained at various times and from various sources was as follows. In the spring, 4 winters past, spring 1850, a party of white men, amounting to about 40, were seen traveling southward over the ice, and dragging a boat with them by some Eskimo, who were killing seals near the north shore of King William's Land, which is a large island. None of the party could speak the Eskimo language intelligibly, but by signs the party were made to understand that their ship or ships had been crushed by ice, and that they were now going to where they expected to find deer to shoot. From the appearance of the men, all of whom, except one officer, looked thin, they were then supposed to be getting short of provisions, and purchased a small seal from the natives. At a later date, the same season, but previous to the breaking up of the ice, the bodies of some 30 persons were discovered on the continent, and 5 on an island near it, about a day's long journey to the northwest of a large stream, which can be no other than Back's Great Fish River, named by the Eskimo Dutkohikalik, as its description and that of the low shore in the neighborhood of Point Ogle and Montreal Island agree exactly with that of Sir George Back. Some of the bodies had been buried, probably those of the first victims of famine. Some were in a tent or tents, others under the boat, which had been turned over to form a shelter, and several lay scattered about in different directions. Of those found on the island, one was supposed to have been an officer, as he had a telescope strapped over his shoulders, and his double-barreled gun lay underneath him. From the mutilated state of many of the corpses and the contents of the kettles, it is evident that our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resource, cannibalism, as a means of prolonging existence. There appeared to have been an abundant stock of ammunition, as the powder was emptied in a heap on the ground by the natives out of the kegs or cases containing it, and a quantity of ball and shot was found below the high water mark, having probably been left on the ice close to the beach. There must have been a number of watches, compasses, telescopes, guns, several double-barreled, etc., all of which appeared to have been broken up, as I saw pieces of those different articles with the Eskimo, together with some silver spoons and forks. I purchased as many as I could get. A list of the most important of these I enclose, with a rough sketch of the crests and initials of the forks and spoons. The articles themselves shall be handed over to the secretary of the Hudson's Bay Company on my arrival in London. None of the Eskimo with whom I conversed had seen the whites, nor had they ever been at the place where the bodies were found, but they had their information from those who had been there, and who had seen the party when traveling. I offer no apology for taking the liberty of addressing you, as I do so from a belief that their lordships would be desirous of being put in possession at as early date as possible of any tidings, however meagre and unexpectedly obtained, regarding this painfully interesting subject. I may add that by means of our guns and nets, we obtained an ample supply of provisions last autumn, and my small party passed the winter in snow houses in comparative comfort, the skins of the deer shot affording abundant warm clothing and bedding. My spring journey was a failure, in consequence of an accumulation of obstacles, several of which my former experience in Arctic traveling had not taught me to expect. I have, etc., John Ray, M.D., commanding Hudson Bay Company Arctic Expedition. End of the Fate of Sir John Franklin by John Ray. Read by Phil Schempf.
The Nature of the Human Mind, Benedict Spinoza. A chapter from the Philosophy of Spinoza, edited by Joseph Ratner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The essence of man is formed by certain modes of attributes of God, that is to say, modes of thought, the idea of all of them being prior by nature to the modes of thought themselves. And if this idea exists, other modes, which also have an idea in nature prior to them, must exist in the same individual likewise. Therefore, an idea is the first thing which forms the being of the human mind. But it is not the idea of a non-existent thing, for then the idea itself could not be said to exist. It will therefore be the idea of something actually existing. Neither will it be the idea of an infinite thing, for an infinite thing must always necessarily exist, and this is absurd. Therefore, the first thing which forms the actual being of the human mind is the idea of an individual thing actually existing. The knowledge of everything which happens in the object of any idea necessarily exists in God, in so far as he is considered as modified by the idea of that object, that is to say, in so far as he forms the mind of any being. The knowledge, therefore, necessarily exists in God of everything which happens in the object of the idea constituting the human mind. That is to say, it exists in him insofar as he forms the nature of the human mind, or whatever happens in the object of the idea constituting the human mind must be perceived by the human mind. In other words, an idea of that thing will necessarily exist in the human mind. That is to say, if the object of the idea constituting the human mind be a body, nothing can happen in that body which is not perceived by the mind. If the body were not the object of the human mind, the ideas of the modifications of the body would not be in God insofar as he has formed our mind, but would be in him insofar as he has formed the mind of another thing. That is to say, the ideas of the modification. The ideas of the modifications of the body would not be in our mind. But we have ideas of the modification of a body. Therefore, the object of the idea constituting the human mind is a body, and that too actually existing. Again, if there were also any other object of the mind besides a body, since nothing exists from which some effect does not follow, the idea of some effort produced by this object would necessarily exist in our mind. But there is no such idea. Therefore, the object of the idea constituting the human mind is a body, or a certain mode of extension actually existing, and nothing else. Hence it follows that man is composed of mind and body, and that the human body exists as we perceive it. Hence we see not only that the human mind is united to the body, but also what is to be understood by the union of the mind and body. But no one can understand it adequately or distinctly without knowing adequately beforehand the nature of our body. For those things which we have proved hitherto are altogether general, nor do they refer more to man than to other individuals, all of which are animate, although in different degrees. For of everything there necessarily exists in God an idea of which he is the cause, in the same way as the idea of the human body exists in him, and therefore everything that we have said of the idea of the human body is necessarily true of the idea of any other thing. We cannot, however, deny that ideas, like objects themselves, differ from one another, and that one is more excellent, or contains more reality than another, just as the object of one idea is more excellent and contains more reality than another. Therefore, in order to determine the differences between the human mind and other things in its superiority over them, we must first know, as we have said, the nature of its object, that is to say, the nature of the human body. I'm not able to explain it here, nor is such an explanation necessary for what I wish to demonstrate. This much, nevertheless, I will say generally, that in proportion as one body is better adapted than another to do or suffer many things, in the same proportion will the mind at the same time be better adapted to perceive many things. And the more the actions of a body depend upon itself alone, and the less other bodies cooperate with it in action, the better adapted will the mind for distinctly understanding. We can thus determine the superiority of one mind to another. We can also see the reason why we have only a very confused knowledge of our body, together with many other things, which I shall deduce in what follows. End of The Nature of the Human Mind, Benedict Spinoza.
A Noble Life Work After 57 by Isabella Webb Parks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. In 1880, Miss Sophia B. Packard, then corresponding secretary of the Women's American Baptist Home Missionary Society, with her old-time friend and efficient helper, Miss Harriet E. Giles, made a trip through the South in order to become better acquainted with the needs of the missionary work among the Negroes. The poverty, ignorance, and degradation of the colored women pierced the hearts of these Christian women. Miss Packard had already accomplished a noble life work. A preeminently successful teacher, she had held successively the positions of preceptress in New Salem Academy in a private school, in Connecticut Literary Society at Suffield, and principal of Oriel Institute in Worcester. Afterwards, she was for many years pastor's assistant to Dr. Morimer, both at Shawmut Avenue, Boston, and at Tremont Temple. In this position, her work among the poor called her attention to the need of home missionary work, and in 1878 she resigned her position with Dr. Lorimer and started the movement which resulted in the organization of the Home Missionary Society. Of this she was elected corresponding secretary. She was now 57 years of age. Almost anyone else would have gone home from the South and urged younger women to go to the rescue of their sisters in black. Not so Miss Packard. She resigned the secretaryship of the Missionary Society and asked to be sent South to teach the colored women. A storm of opposition and remonstrance greeted her proposal. She was too old to undertake a new work of such magnitude. With the prevalent view of missionary work, both at home and foreign, the good sisters thought that many, not to say any, others could do the work in the South, while she could not be spared from her present position. Finally and conclusively, the Society had no money for so great an undertaking. More than once the two heroic women, in face of seemingly insuperable difficulties, gave up their purpose. But each time the conviction of duty returned with increased power, and they arose from a sleepless night saying, "We must go south." One by one the difficulties were overcome. By private solicitation, Miss Packard raised enough money to sustain them a few months. Feeling it most desirable that they go as the approved servants of a responsible society, she paid this money into the treasury of the Missionary Society and again asked to be sent south. In April 1881, Miss Packard and Miss Giles reached Atlanta, their chosen field of labor. When they called upon the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church, colored, they found him on his knees, praying that God would send Christian women to teach the women of his race. Their school opened April 11th in the damp, dark basement of Friendship Church, with 11 pupils. Within 3 months, more than 80 scholars were enrolled. During the first summer, Mrs. Packard and Giles remained in Atlanta visiting the homes of the colored people. In the fall, they opened their school with 173 pupils. From that time, Miss Packard's life was one of ceaseless toil, 8 months of the year in her school in the South, the other 4 in the North, raising the necessary funds. The history of her work in both lines is full of the miracle of faith, but the limits of this article allow little more than a summary of results. By a remarkable chain of circumstances, which Miss Packard and Miss Giles believed to be clearly providential, the Honorable J.D. Rockefeller became interested in the school, and has since been its most munificent benefactor. In honor of his wife, the institution was given her maiden name, Spelman. April 11, 1891, Spelman Seminary celebrated its 10th birthday. But not in the basement of Friendship Church. A most beautiful chapel was crowded to its utmost capacity with the students, teachers, and friends of the seminary. This chapel is situated in a fine large brick building called Rockefeller Hall. Near it are 3 other large brick buildings, Packard Hall, the Industrial Building, and a laundry. Another $35,000 brick building, the gift of Mr. Rockefeller, is about to be erected. 4 large frame buildings, some of the old U.S. barracks, are occupied as dormitories. These buildings are located upon a valuable 14-acre lot on the outskirts of the city. The number of students gathered on that memorable occasion was 860, of teachers 33. The seminary has excellent normal, preparatory, scientific, and industrial departments, and is well supplied with necessary apparatus, library, etc. It is unique in the exceptional advantages it offers in the following departments. As might be expected from the character of the 2 women who founded the school, it gives the most prominence to its biblical and religious department. The Bible is used as a textbook, and companion studies as Christian evidences, ethics, etc. are thoroughly taught. The familiarity of the students with the English Bible is a gratifying surprise to a visitor in their Bible classes. But they do not stop with a mere intellectual knowledge of the Scriptures. The motto on the wall of the chapel, "Our Whole School for Christ," expresses the spirit of the work. Hundreds of girls have found Christ at Spelman. Miss Packard counted a week without conversions, a week of saddest failure. A legitimate outcome of the work just mentioned is the missionary training department. 2 of Spelman's daughters have already gone as missionaries to Africa. The nurse training department is another valuable feature. In this department a thorough course of study in physiology and hygiene is provided, and the leading physicians of Atlanta give free lectures. But more than the theory is taught. In a school of more than 400 boarding pupils, even in the exceptionally healthy city of Atlanta, there are always some sick. A small frame building is fitted up for a sick ward, and there the sick are cared for by members of the nurse training department. On January 3, 1892, the beautiful chapel of Spelman Seminary was again crowded to overflowing by the students, teachers, and friends of the institution. But the hush of sadness pervaded the room, and low voices and tearful eyes told of the shadow of a great sorrow. On an easel on the platform stood a fine crayon portrait of Miss Packard, but the grand woman through whom God had wrought the miracle that we saw around us was gone forever. It was meet that with bowed heads and stricken hearts the friends of the colored race, nay, of humanity, gathered to do honor to her memory. On the 17th of the preceding June, Miss Packard had entered upon her reward. It is impossible, says Jacobi, to be a hero in anything unless one is first a hero in faith. The briefest sketch of Miss Packard's life must be poorly drawn, indeed, if it fail to allow that she deserves a place among the heroes of faith, of whom the world was not worthy. Nor was Miss Packard one of those who have the faith that removes mountains, yet have not love. The teachers associated with her tell how in the midst of perplexing cares and crushing burdens, often in great bodily weakness, she constantly planned for everyone's comfort but her own. Her pupils bear testimony to the tender solicitude for their welfare and the warm sympathy which bound them to her by ties of strongest affection. Self was lost in her work. She never uttered a word of boasting for what she had done, nor of complaint for what she suffered. The greatest thing that can be said of any human being is to be truthfully said of Miss Packard. In her life, her work, her character, she was Christ-like. End of A Noble Life Work After 57 by Isabella Webb Parks.
Official Account of the Death of Archbishop Seghers by John H. Keatley. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The tragic death of the heroic Archbishop Seghers produced a deep impression upon the Catholics of this country at the time of its occurrence. The first official statement of the murder was made by Mr. John H. Keatley, a former United States judge in Alaska, to His Eminence Cardinal Gibbons. As an official historical document, it is entitled to a place in these pages. Sioux City, Iowa, March 21st, 1892. Cardinal Gibbons, Baltimore, Maryland. Very dear Sir, having served as the United States Judge of Alaska until December 8, 1889, and Archbishop Seghers of British Columbia having been murdered by one of his associates within the limits of Alaska in the year 1887, I deem it my duty, after having become acquainted with all the principal facts, they being somewhat scattered among documents and held in memory by persons now widely dispersed, to present them to you in this form, in a concise narrative, so that you may file it in the archives of the Cardinalate, if you desire, for future reference. The extraordinary and tragic character of the incident resulting in the death of the bishop is a sufficient justification of this course. Up until the spring of 1887, no serious attempt had been made to establish any Roman Catholic missions among the natives of the valley of the Yukon in Alaska, owing in part to the opposition made by the Greco-Russian priests and monks subject to the jurisdiction of the Holy Synod at Moscow, Russia, and to the opposition made for a century and more by the officers of the Hudson Bay Company, whose agents have been operating along the headwaters of that great river for several generations. A change of policy was deemed necessary, and consequently, on the 30th of July, 1887, Archbishop Seghers left Victoria, British Columbia, accompanied by 2 Jesuit fathers, Tosi and Robol, and a servant named Frank Fuller. By August 31st, the party was heard from at the head of Salmon River in western Alaska by a letter from the Archbishop, stating that the party was having some trouble with the natives. This did not alarm his friends, and the news of August 31st being the last heard from him for many months, it did not create any uneasiness, owing to the fact that it frequently requires an entire year to receive intelligence from those remote regions, and even from United States officials, who are able to command better facilities for communications than many others. The next intelligence received from the Archbishop and his party was that on the morning of November 27th he was shot and killed by Frank Fuller, near a native village called Nulato, on the Yukon River. Fuller was about 30 years of age, was tall and slender, and of a nervous, excitable temperament. He had been a watchmaker at Portland, Oregon, before going to Victoria, and meeting Archbishop Seghers at Victoria, and expressing a strong desire to accompany the party to the Yukon, he was taken as the Archbishop's personal attendant. This was contrary to the advice of the other members of the party. When they reached the Chilkoot village, preparatory to crossing the coast range by the Chilkoot Pass to the headwaters of the Yukon, Father Tosi strongly urged the Archbishop to send Fuller back to the settlement as a last opportunity, on account of his singular behavior, which indicated some unsoundness of mind. The party continued together until they reached the mouth of the Stewart River in western British America, where Fathers Tosi and Robol established themselves to winter, and Archbishop Seghers proceeded down the Yukon, the fathers still protesting against his going alone with young Fuller on account of his strange and inexplicable conduct. The Archbishop was resolute, and refused to believe that he was in any danger whatever. They had one Indian with them, and proceeding to the point near Nulato, which they reached on the evening of November 26, 1887, they went ashore and encamped. About daylight on the morning of November 27th, Fuller went to where the Archbishop was sleeping in the tent, called him as if to awaken him to begin the journey for the day, and when the prelate attempted to rise, he was shot by Fuller and mortally wounded, with the gun which had all along been part of the outfit of the expedition. The Indians started down the river with the Archbishop, who died the same day, and finally deposited the body at St. Michael's in Bering Sea, where it was taken in charge, and where it was deposited in the old Russian church at that place, by the Russian priest stationed at St. Michael's. In the early summer of 1888, a burial case was sent from Victoria to St. Michael's for the purpose of bringing home the body, either by a revenue cutter or by one of the steamers of the Alaska Commercial Company trading on that coast. The United States steamer Theodicy, then commanded by Lieutenant Commander W.H. Emery of the United States Navy, when coming out of the Arctic Ocean to return to San Francisco by way of Sitka, touched at St. Michael's, disinterred the remains, placed them in the burial case, and brought them away. While the Theodicy remained at Sitka during the month of October, 1888, awaiting final orders, I had an opportunity of viewing the face of the dead Archbishop, as his body lay in the burial case on the quarter-deck of the vessel. It did not seem to have suffered much change, though almost a year had elapsed since his death. His remains were landed at Victoria about the middle of November, 1888, and permanently interred at that place. Fuller found his way to Unalaska, where he was arrested and brought to Sitka for trial, along with the Indian who had been of the party, and was detained as a witness. Fuller was defended by Honorable A.K. Delaney, the United States Collector of Customs at Sitka, and interposed the defense of insanity. Fuller testified on his own behalf, and stated that he was in constant apprehension that the Archbishop intended killing him upon the first opportunity, and to prevent his own death in that way, he had taken the Archbishop's life. A diary subsequently found, kept by him up to the time of the tragedy, showed numerous entries where apprehension of death from the hands of the Archbishop were expressed. Upon being asked if the Archbishop had been unkind to him in any way during any part of the journey from the time of starting, He replied he had not. The jury were instructed that they must find him either guilty of murder in the first degree, or acquit him on account of his insane delusion, but, strange to say, they brought in a verdict of manslaughter. His counsel made no motion to set aside this verdict, and he was sentenced to an imprisonment at hard labor for a period of 10 years at the Washington Penitentiary at McNeil's Island, in Puget Sound, where he still is. A report was published a year ago that he had made his escape from the island, with heavy shackles upon him, but after inquiry I find that there is no truth in the publication. Archbishop Seghers was born in Belgium, and at the time of his death was 39 years of age. He came to Victoria, British Columbia, in 1863, and in 1879 was created Archbishop of Oregon. In 1883 he resigned and returned to Victoria to devote the remainder of his life to the Christian welfare of the Indians of British Columbia and the natives of the North Pacific coast. The foregoing statement of the deplorable affairs is from official documents, evidence in court, and from eyewitnesses, and is as near the truth as it can ever be ascertained. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, John H. Keatley. End of The Official Account of the Death of Archbishop Seghers by John H. Keatley. Read by Phil Schempf.
The Place of Signs in a Liberal Education by Bertrand Russell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Science, to the ordinary reader of newspapers, is represented by a varying selection of sensational triumphs, such as wireless telegraphy and aeroplanes, radioactivity, and the marvels of modern alchemy. It is not of this aspect of science that I wish to speak. Science, in this aspect, consists of detached, up-to-date fragments, interesting only until they are replaced by something newer and more up-to-date, displaying nothing of the system of patiently constructed knowledge out of which, almost as casual incident, have come the practically useful results which interest the man in the street. The increased command over the forces of nature which is derived from science is undoubtedly an amply sufficient reason to encourage scientific research. But this reason has been so often urged and is so easily appreciated that other reasons, to my mind quite as important, are apt to be overlooked. It is with these other reasons, especially with the intrinsic value of a scientific habit of mind in forming our outlook on the world, that I shall be concerned in what follows. The instance of wireless telegraphy will serve to illustrate the difference between the 2 points of view. Almost all the serious intellectual labor required for the possibility of this invention is due to 3 men, Faraday, Maxwell, and Hertz. In alternating layers of experiment and theory, these 3 men build upon the modern theory of electromagnetism and demonstrate the identity of light with electromagnetic waves. The system which they discovered is one of profound intellectual interest, bringing together and unifying an endless variety of apparently detached phenomena, and displaying a cumulative mental power which cannot but afford delight to every generous spirit. The mechanical details which remain to be adjusted in order to utilize their discoveries for a practical system of telegraphy demanded, no doubt, very considerable ingenuity, but had not that broad sweep and that universality which could give them intrinsic interest as an object of disinterested contemplation. From the point of view of training the mind, of giving that well-informed, impersonal outlook which constitutes culture, in the good sense of this much misused word, it seems to be generally held indisputable that a literary education is superior to one based on science. Even the warmest advocates of science are apt to rest their claims on the contention that culture ought to be sacrificed to utility. Those men of science who respect culture, when they associate what men learn in the classics, are apt to admit, not merely politely, but sincerely, a certain inferiority on their side, compensated doubtless by the services which science renders to humanity, but nonetheless real. And so as long as this attitude exists among men of science, it tends to verify itself. The intrinsically valuable aspects of science tend to be sacrificed to the merely useful, and little attempt is made to preserve that leisurely, systematic survey by which the finer quality of mind is formed and nourished. But even if there be, present fact, any such inferiority as is supposed in the educational value of science, this is, I believe, not the fault of science itself, but the fault of the spirit in which science is taught. If its full possibilities were realized by those who teach it, I believe that its capacity for producing those habits of mind which constitute the higher mental excellence would be at least as great as that of literature, and more particularly of Greek and Latin literature. In saying this, I have no wish whatever to disparage a classical education. I have not myself enjoyed its benefits, and my knowledge of Greek and Latin authors is derived almost wholly from translations. But I firmly persuade that the Greek fully deserve all the admiration that is bestowed upon them, and that it is a very great and serious loss to be unacquainted with their writings. It is not by attacking them, but by drawing attention to neglected excellences in science, that I wish to conduct my argument. One defect, however, does seem inherent in a purely classical education, namely, a too exclusive emphasis on the past, by the study of what is absolutely ended and can never be renewed. A habit of criticism towards the present and the future is engendered. The qualities in which the present excels are qualities to which the study of the past does not direct attention, and to which, therefore, the student of Greek civilization may easily become blind. In what is new and growing, there is apt to be something crude, insolent, and even a little vulgar, which is shocking to the man of sensitive taste. Quivering from the rough contact, he retires to the trim gardens of polished past, forgetting that they were reclaiming from the wilderness by men as rough and earth-soiled as those from whom he shrinks in his own day. The habit of being unable to recognize merit until it is dead is too apt to be the result of a purely bookish life, and a culture based wholly on the past will seldom be able to pierce through everyday surroundings to the essential splendor of contemporary things, or to the hope of still greater splendor in the future. My eyes saw not the men of old, and now their age away has rolled. I weep to think I shall not see the heroes of posterity. So says the Chinese poet. But such impartiality is rare in the more pugnacious atmosphere of the West, where champions of the past and future fight a never-ending battle, instead of combining to seek out the merits of both. This consideration, which militates not only against the exclusive study of the classics, but against every form of culture which has become static, traditional, and academic, leads inevitably to the fundamental question, what is the true end of education? But before attempting to answer this question, it will be well to define the sense in which we are to use the word education. For this purpose I shall distinguish the sense in which I mean to use it from two others, both perfectly legitimate, the one broader and the other narrower, than the sense in which I mean to use the word. In the broader sense, education will include not only what we learn through instruction, but all that we learn through personal experience, the formation of character through the education of life. This aspect of education, vitally important as it is, I will say nothing, since its consideration would introduce topics quite foreign to the question with which we are concerned. In the narrower sense, education may be confined to instruction, the imparting of definite information on various subjects, because such information, in and for itself, is useful in daily life. Elementary education, reading, writing, and arithmetics, is almost wholly of this kind. But instruction, necessary as it is, does not per se constitute education in the sense in which I wish to consider it. Education, in the sense in which I mean it, may be defined as the formation, by means of instruction, of certain mental habits and a certain outlook on life and the world. It remains to ask ourselves what mental habits and what sort of outlooks can be hoped for as the result of instruction. When we have answered this question, we can attempt to decide what science has to contribute to the formation of the habits and outlook which we desire. Our whole life is built about a certain number, not a very small number, of primary instincts and impulses. Only what is in some way connected with these instincts and impulses appears to us desirable or important. There is no faculty, whether reason or virtue, or whatever it may be called, that can take our active life and our hopes and fears outside the region controlled by these first movers of all desire. Each of them is like a queen bee, aided by a hive of workers gathering honey. But when the queen is gone, the workers languish and die, and the cells remain empty of their expected sweetness. So with each primary impulse in civilized man, it is surrounded and protected by a busy swarm of attendant derivative desires, which store up in its service whatever honey the surrounding world affords. But if the queen impulse dies, the death-dealing influences, though retarded a little by habit, spread slowly through all the subsidiary impulses, and a whole tract of life becomes inexplicably colorless. What was formerly full of zest, and so obviously worth doing that it raised no question, has now grown dreary and purposeless. With a sense of disillusion we inquire the meaning of life, and decide, perhaps, that all is vanity. Search for an outside meaning that can compel an inner response must always be disappointed. All meaning must be at the bottom related to our primary desires, and when they are extinct, no miracle can restore to the world the value which they reflected upon it. The purpose of education, therefore, cannot be to create any primary impulse which is lacking in the uneducated. The purpose can only be to enlarge the scope of those that human nature provides, increasing the number and variety of attendant thoughts, and by showing where the most permanent satisfaction is to be found. Under the impulse of a Calvinistic order of the natural man, this obvious truth has been too often misconceived in the training of the young. Nature has been falsely regarded as excluding all that is best in what is natural. The endeavor to teach virtue has led to the production of stunted and contorted hypocrites instead of full-grown human beings. From such mistakes in education, a better psychology, or a kinder heart, is beginning to preserve the present generation. We need, therefore, waste no more words on the theory that the purpose of education is to thwart or eradicate nature. But although nature must supply the initial forces of desire, nature is not, in the civilized man, the spasmodic, fragmentary, and yet violent set of impulses that it is in the savage. Each impulse has its constitutional ministry of thought and knowledge and reflection, through which possible conflicts of impulses are foreseen, and temporary impulses are controlled by the unifying impulse which may be called wisdom. In this way, education destroys the crudity of instinct and increases through knowledge the wealth and variety of the individual's contact with the outside world, making him no longer an isolated fighting unit, but a citizen of the universe, embracing distant countries, remote regions of space, and vast stretches of past and future within the circle of his interest. It is this simultaneous softening in the instance of desire and enlargement of its scope that is the chief moral end of education. Closely connected to this moral end is the more purely intellectual aims of education, the endeavor to make us see and imagine the world in an objective manner, and far as possible as it is in itself, and not merely through a disordering medium of personal desire. The complete attainment of such an objective view is no doubt an ideal, indefinitely approachable, but not actually fully realizable. Education, considered as a process of forming our mental habits and our outlook on the world, is to be judged successful in proportion as its outcome approximates to this ideal. That is to say, as it gives us a true view of our place in society, of the relation of the whole human society and its non-human environment, and the nature of the non-human world as it is in itself apart from our own desires and interests. If this standard is admitted, we can return to the considerations of science, inquiring how far science contributes to such an aim, and whether it is in any aspect superior to its rivals in educational practice. Two opposite and at first sight conflicting merits belong to sciences, as against literature and art. The one, which is not inherently necessary, but is certainly true at present day, is hopefulness as to the future of human achievement, in particular as to the useful work that may be accomplished by any intelligent student. This merit and the cheerful outlook which it engenders prevent what might otherwise be the depressing effect of another aspect of science, to my mind also a merit, and perhaps its greatest merit. I mean the irrelevance of human passions and the wholly subjective apparatus where scientific truth is concerned. Each of these reasons for preferring the study of science requires some amplification. Let us begin with the first. In the study of literature or art, our attention is perpetually riveted upon the past. The men of Greece or of the Renaissance did better than any do now. The triumphs of former ages, so far from facilitating triumphs in our own age, actually increased the difficulty of fresh triumphs by rendering originality harder of attainment. Not only is artistic achievement not cumulative, but it seems even to depend upon a certain freshness and naivete of impulse and vision, which civilization tends to destroy. Hence comes, to those who have been nourished on the literary and artistic productions of former ages, a certain peevishness and undue fastidiousness towards the present, from which there seems no escape except in the deliberate vandalism, which ignores tradition, and in the search after originality achieves only the eccentric. But in such vandalism there is none of the simplicity and spontaneity out of which great art springs. Theory is still the cankerous core. Insincerity destroys the advantage of a merely pretended ignorance. The despair of thus arriving from an education which suggests no preeminent mental activity, except that of artistic creation, is wholly absent from an education which gives the knowledge of scientific method. The discovery of scientific method, except in pure mathematics, is a thing of yesterday. Speaking broadly, we may say that it dates from Galileo. Yet already it has transformed the world, and its success proceeds with ever-accelerating velocity. In science, men have discovered an activity of the very highest value, in which they are no longer, as in art, dependent or progress upon the appearance of continually greater genius. For in science, successors stand upon the shoulders of their predecessors. Where one man of supreme genius has invented a method, 1,000 lesser men can apply it. No transcendent ability is required in order to make useful discoveries in science. The edifice of science needs its masons, bricklayers, and common laborers, as well as its foremen, master builders, and architects. In art, nothing worth doing can be done without genius. In science, even a very moderate capacity can contribute to a supreme achievement. In science, the man of real genius is the man who invents a new method. The notable discoveries are often made by its successors, who can apply their method with fresh vigor, unimpaired by the previous labor of perfecting it. But the mental caliber of the thought required for their work, however brilliant, is not so great as that required by the first inventor of the method. There are in science immense numbers of different methods, appropriate to different classes of problems. But over and above them all, there is something not easily definable, which may be called the method of science. It was formerly customary to identify this with the inductive method, and to associate with it the name of Bacon. But the true inductive method was not discovered by Bacon. And the true method of science is something which includes deduction as much as induction, logic and mathematics, as much as botany and geology. I shall not attempt the difficult task of stating what the scientific method is, but I will try to indicate the temper of mind out of which the scientific method grows, which is the second of the two merits that were mentioned above as belonging to a scientific education. The kernel of the scientific outlook is a thing so simple, so obvious, so seemingly trivial, that the mention of it may almost excite derision. The kernel of the scientific outlook is the refusal to regard our own desires, tastes, and interests as affording a key to the understanding of the world. Stated this baldly, this may seem no more than a trite truism, but to remember it consistently in matters arousing our passionate partisanship is by no means easy, especially where the available evidence is uncertain and inconclusive. A few illustrations will make it clear. Aristotle, I understand, considered that the stars must move in circles because the circle is the most perfect curve. In the absence of evidence to the contrary, he allowed himself to decide a question of fact by an appeal to aesthetical moral considerations. In such a case, it is at once obvious to us that this appeal was unjustifiable. We know now how to ascertain as a fact the way in which the heavenly bodies move, and we know that they do not move in circles, or even in accurate ellipses, or in any other kind of simply describable curve. This may be painful to a certain hankering after simplicity of pattern in the universe. We know that in astronomy, such feelings are irrelevant. Easy as this knowledge seems now, we owe it to the courage and insight of the first inventors of scientific method, and more especially of Galileo. We take as another illustration Malthus's doctrine of population. This illustration is all the better for the fact that his actual doctrine is now known to be largely erroneous. It is not his conclusions that are valuable, but the temper and method of his inquiry. As everyone knows, it was to him that Darwin owed an essential part of his theory of natural selection, and this was only possible because Malthus's outlook was truly scientific. His great merit lies in considering man not as the object of praise or blame, but as part of nature, a thing with a certain characteristic behavior from which certain consequences must follow. If the behavior is not quite what Malthus supposed, if the consequences are not quite what he inferred, that may falsify his conclusions, but does not impair the value of his method. The objections which were made when his doctrine was new, that it was horrible and depressing, that people ought not to act as he said they did, and so on, were all such as implied an unscientific attitude of mind. As against all of them, his calm determination to treat man as a natural phenomena marks an important advance over the reformers of the 18th century and the Revolution. Under the influence of Darwinism, the scientific attitude towards man has now become fairly common, and it is to some people quite natural, though to most it is still a difficult and artificial intellectual contortion. There is, however, one study which is as yet almost wholly untouched by the scientific spirit. I mean the study of philosophy. Philosophers, and the public image that the scientific spirit must pervade pages that bristle with allusions to ions, germ plasms, and the eyes of shellfish. But as the devil can quote scripture, so the philosopher can quote science. The scientific spirit is not an affair of quotation, of externally required information, any more than manners are an affair of the etiquette book. The scientific attitude of mind involves a sweeping away of all other desires. In the interest of the desire to know, it involves suppression of hopes and fears, loves and hates, and the whole subjective emotional life, until we become subdued to the material, able to see it frankly, without preconceptions, without bias, without any wish except to see it as it is, and without any belief that what it is must be determined by some relation, positive or negative, to what we should like it to be. or what we can easily imagine it to be. Now, in philosophy, this attitude of mind has not yet been achieved. A certain self-absorption, not personal, but human, has marked almost all attempts to conceive the universe as a whole. Mind, or some aspect of it, thought or will or sentience, has been regarded as the pattern after which the universe is to be conceived. For no better reason, at bottom, than that such a universe would not seem strange, and would give us the cozy feeling that every place is like home. To conceive the universe as essentially progressive or essentially deteriorating, for example, is to give to our hopes and fears a cosmic importance which may, of course, be justified, but which we have as yet no reason to suppose justified. Until we have learned to think of it in ethically neutral terms, we have not arrived at a scientific attitude in philosophy. And until we have arrived at such an attitude, it is hardly to be hoped but philosophy will achieve any solid results. I have spoken, so far, largely of the negative aspects of the scientific spirit, but it is from the positive aspect that its value is derived. The instinct of constructiveness, which is one of the chief incentives to artistic creation, can find in scientific systems a satisfaction more massive than any epic poem. Disinterested curiosity, which is the source of almost all intellectual effort, finds with the astonished delight that science can unveil secrets which might well have seemed forever undiscoverable. The desire for a larger life, and wider interests, for an escape from private circumstances, and even from the whole recurring human cycle of birth and death, is fulfilled by the impersonal cosmic outlook of science as by nothing else. To all these must be added, as contributing to the happiness of the man of science, the admiration of splendid achievement, and the consciousness of inestimable utility to the human race. A life devoted to science is therefore a happy life, and its happiness is derived from the very best sources that are open to the dwellers on this troubled and passionate planet. End of The Place of Science in a Liberal Education by Bertrand Russell.
Friedrich Schiller's Preface to The Robbers, published in 1781. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Schiller's Preface, as prefixed to the first edition of The Robbers, published in 1781, now first translated into English. This play is to be regarded merely as a dramatic narrative in which, for the purpose of tracing out the innermost workings of the soul, advantage has been taken of the dramatic method, without otherwise conforming to the stringent rules of theatrical composition, or seeking the dubious advantage of stage adaptation. It must be admitted as somewhat inconsistent that three very remarkable people, whose acts are dependent on perhaps 1,000 contingencies, should be completely developed within 3 hours, considering that it would scarcely be possible in the ordinary course of events that three such remarkable people should, even in 24 hours, fully reveal their characters to the most penetrating inquirer. A greater amount of incident is here crowded together than it was possible for me to confine within the narrow limits prescribed by Aristotle and Bataille. It is, however, not so much the bulk of my play as its contents which banish it from the stage. Its scheme and economy require that several characters should appear who would offend the finer feelings of virtue and shock the delicacy of our manners. Every delineator of human character is placed in the same dilemma, if he proposes to give a faithful picture of the world as it really is, and not an ideal fantasy, a mere creation of his own. It is the course of mortal things that the good should be shadowed by the bad, and virtue shine the brightest when contrasted with vice. Whoever proposes to discourage vice and to vindicate religion, morality, and social order against their enemies must unveil crime in all its deformity, and place it before the eyes of men in its colossal magnitude. He must diligently explore its dark mazes, and make himself familiar with sentiments at the wickedness of which his soul revolts. Vice is here exposed in its innermost workings. In Francis it resolves all the confused terrors of conscience into wild abstractions, destroys virtuous sentiments by dissecting them, and holds up the earnest voice of religion to mockery and scorn. He who has gone so far, a distinction by no means enviable, as to quicken his understanding at the expense of his soul, to him the holiest things are no longer holy. To him God and man are alike indifferent, and both worlds are as nothing. Of such a monster I have endeavored to sketch a striking and lifelike portrait, to hold up to abhorrence all the machinery of his scheme of vice, and to test its strength by contrasting it with truth. How far my narrative is successful in accomplishing these objects the reader is left to judge. My conviction is that I have painted nature to the life. Next to this man, Francis, stands another who would perhaps puzzle not a few of my readers. A mind for which the greatest crimes have only charms through the glory which attaches to them, the energy which their perpetration requires, and the danger which attend them. A remarkable and important personage, abundantly endowed with the powers of becoming either a Brutus or a Catiline, according as that power is directed. An unhappy conjunction of circumstances determines him to choose the latter for his example, and it is only after a fearful strain that he is recalled to emulate the former. Erroneous notions of activity and power, an exuberance of strength which bursts through all the barriers of law, must of necessity conflict with the rules of social life. To these enthusiastic dreams of greatness and efficiency, it needed but a sarcastic bitterness against the unpoetic spirit of the age, to complete the strange Don Quixote, whom in the robber Moor we at once detest and love, admire and pity. It is, I hope, unnecessary to remark that I no more hold up this picture as a warning exclusively to robbers than the greatest Spanish satire was levelled exclusively at knight-errants. It is nowadays so much the fashion to be witty at the expense of religion, that a man will hardly pass for a genius if he does not allow his impious satire to run a tilt at its most sacred truths. The noble simplicity of Holy Writ must needs be abused and turned into ridicule at the daily assemblies of the so-called wits. For what is there so holy and serious that will not raise a laugh if a false sense be attached to it? Let me hope that I shall have rendered no inconsiderable service to the cause of true religion and morality in holding up these wanton misbelievers to the detestation of society under the form of the most despicable robbers. But still more, I have made these said immoral characters to stand out favourably in particular points, and even in some measure to compensate by qualities of the head for what they are deficient in those of the heart. Herein I have done no more than literally copy nature. Every man, even the most depraved, bears in some degree the impress of the Almighty's image. And perhaps the greatest villain is not farther removed from the most upright man than the petty offender. For the moral forces keep even pace with the powers of the mind, and the greater the capacity bestowed on man, the greater and more enormous becomes his misapplication of it, the more responsible is he for his errors. The Adramelech of Klopstock in his Messiah awakens in us a feeling in which admiration is blended with detestation. We follow Milton's Satan with shuddering wonder through the pathless realms of chaos, The Medea of the old dramatists is, in spite of all her crimes, a great and wondrous woman, and Shakespeare's Richard III is sure to excite the admiration of the reader, much as he would hate the reality. If it is to be my task to portray men as they are, I must at the same time include their good qualities, of which even the most vicious are never totally destitute. If I would warn mankind against the tiger, I must not omit to describe his glossy, beautiful marked skin, lest owing to this omission the ferocious animal should not be recognized till too late. Besides this, a man who is so utterly depraved as to be without a single redeeming point is no meet subject for art, and would disgust rather than excite the interest of the reader, who would turn over with impatience the pages which concern him. A noble soul can no more endure a succession of moral discords than the musical ear the grating of knives upon glass. And for this reason I should have been ill-advised in attempting to bring my drama on the stage. A certain strength of mind is required both on the part of the poet and the reader. In the former, that he may not disguise vice; in the latter, that he may not suffer brilliant qualities to beguile him into admiration of what is essentially detestable. Whether the author has fulfilled his duty he leaves others to judge. That his readers will perform theirs he by no means feels assured. The vulgar, among whom I would not be understood to mean merely the rabble, the vulgar, I say, between ourselves, extend their influence far around, and unfortunately set the fashion. Too short-sighted to reach my full meaning, too narrow-minded to comprehend the largeness of my views, too disingenuous to admit my moral aim, they will, I fear, almost frustrate my good intentions, and pretend to discover in my work an apology for the very vice which it has been my object to condemn, and will perhaps make the poor poet, to whom anything rather than justice is usually accorded, responsible for his simplicity. Thus we have a da capo of the story of Democritus and the Abderitans, and our worthy Hippocrates would need exhaust whole plantations of hellebore were it proposed to remedy this mischief by a healing decoction. Let as many friends of truth as you will instruct their fellow citizens in the pulpit and on the stage. The vulgar will never cease to be vulgar, though the sun and moon may change their course, and heaven and earth wax old as a garment. Perhaps in order to please tender-hearted people, I might have been less true to nature. But if a certain beetle, of whom we have all heard, could extract filth even from pearls, if we have examples that fire has destroyed and water deluged, shall therefore pearls and fire and water be condemned? In consequence of the remarkable catastrophe which ends my play, I may justly claim for it a place among books of morality, for crime meets at last with the punishment it deserves. The lost one enters again within the pale of the law, and virtue is triumphant. Whoever would be but courteous enough towards me to read my work through with a desire to understand it, from him I may expect, not that he will admire the poet, but that he will esteem the honest man. Schiller, Easter Fair, 1781. End of Friedrich Schiller's Preface to the Robbers, published in 1781.
The Story of a Daughter's Love, from Threads of Grey and Gold by Myrtle Reed. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Aaron Burr was past master of what Whistler calls the gentle art of making enemies. Probably no man ever lived who was more bitterly hated or more fiercely reviled. Even at this day, when he has been dead more than half a century, his memory is still assailed. It is the popular impression that he was a villain. Perhaps he was, since where there is smoke there must be fire, but happily we have no concern with the political part of his life. Whatever he may have been, and whatever dark deeds he may have done, there still remains a redeeming feature which no one has denied him: his love for his daughter Theodosia. One must remember that before Burr was 2 years old, his father, mother, and grandparents were all dead. He was reared by an uncle, Timothy Edwards, who doubtless did his best, but the odds were against the homeless child. Neither must we forget that he fought in the Revolution bravely and well. From his early years he was very attractive to women. He was handsome, distinguished, well-dressed, and gifted in many ways. He was generous, ready at compliments and gallantry, and possessed an all-compelling charm. In the autumn of 1777, his regiment was detailed for scouting duty in New Jersey, which was then the debatable ground between colonial and British armies. In January of 1779, Colonel Burr was given command of the lines in Westchester County, New York. It was at this time that he first met Mrs. Prevost, the widow of a British officer. She lived across the Hudson, some 15 miles from shore, and the river was patrolled by the gunboats of the British, and the land by their sentries. In spite of these difficulties, however, Burr managed to make 2 calls upon the lady, although they were both necessarily informal. He sent 6 of his trusted soldiers to a place on the Hudson where there was an overhanging bank under which they moored a large boat, well supplied with blankets and buffalo robes. At 9 o'clock in the evening he left White Plains on the smallest and swiftest horse he could procure, and when he reached the rendezvous, the horse was quickly bound and laid in the boat. Burr and the 6 troopers stepped in, and in half an hour they were across the ferry. The horse was lifted out and unbound, and with a little rubbing he was again ready for duty. Before midnight, Burr was at the house of his beloved, and at 4 in the morning he came back to the troopers awaiting him on the river bank, and the return trip was made in the same manner. For a year and a half after leaving the army, Burr was an invalid, but in July 1782 he married Mrs. Prevost. She was a widow with 2 sons, and was 10 years older than her husband. Her health was delicate, and she had a scar on her forehead, but her mind was finely cultivated, and her manners charming. Long after her death, he said that if his manners were more graceful than those of some men, it was due to her influence, and that his wife was the truest woman and most charming lady he had ever known. It has been claimed by some that Burr's married life was not a happy one, but there are many letters still extant which passed between them which seem to prove the contrary. Before marriage he did not often write to her, but during his absences afterward the fondest wife could have no reason to complain. For instance, "This morning came your truly welcome letter of Monday evening," he wrote her at one time. "Where did it loiter so long? Nothing in my absence is so flattering to me as your health and cheerfulness. I then contemplate nothing so eagerly as my return, amuse myself with ideas of my own happiness, and dwell upon the sweet domestic joys which I fancy prepared for me. Nothing is so unfriendly to every species of enjoyment as melancholy. Gloom, however dressed, however caused, is incompatible with friendship. They cannot have place in the mind at the same time. It is the secret, the malignant foe of sentiment and love." He always wrote fondly of the children. "My love to the smiling little girl," he said in one letter. "I continually plan my return with childish impatience, and fancy 1,000 incidents which are most interesting." After 5 years of married life, the wife wrote him as follows: "Your letters always afford me a singular satisfaction, a sensation entirely my own. This was peculiarly so. It wrought strangely upon my mind and spirits. My Aaron, it was replete with tenderness and with the most lively affection. I read and reread till afraid I should get it by rote and mingle it with common ideas." Soon after Burr entered politics, his wife developed cancer of the most virulent character. Everything that money or available skill could accomplish was done for her, but she died after a lingering and painful illness in the spring of 1794. They had lived together happily for 12 years, and he grieved for her deeply and sincerely. Yet the greatest and most absorbing passion of his life was for his daughter, Theodosia, who was named for her mother and was born in the first year of their marriage. When little Theodosia was first laid in her father's arms, all that was best in him answered to her mute plea for his affection, and later, all that was best in him responded to her baby smile. Between those two there was ever the fullest confidence, never tarnished by doubt or mistrust, and when all the world forsook him, Theodosia, grown to womanhood, stood proudly by her father's side and shared his blame as if it had been the highest honor. When she was a year or two old, they moved to a large house at the corner of Cedar and Nassau Streets in New York City. A large garden surrounded it, and there were grapevines in the rear. Here the child grew strong and healthy, and laid the foundations of her girlish beauty and mature charm. When she was but 3 years old, her mother wrote to the father, saying, "Your dear little Theodosia cannot hear you spoken of without an apparent melancholy, insomuch that her nurse is obliged to exert her invention to divert her, and myself avoid the mention of you in her presence. She was 1 whole day indifferent to everything but your name. Her attachment is not of a common nature." And again, "Your dear little daughter seeks you 20 times a day, calls you to your meals, and will not suffer your chair to be filled by any of the family." The child was educated as if she had been a boy. She learned to read Latin and Greek fluently, and the accomplishments of her time were not neglected. When she was at school, the father wrote her regularly and did not allow one of her letters to wait a day for its affectionate answer. He corrected her spelling and her grammar, instilled sound truths into her mind, and formed her habits. From this plastic clay, with inexpressible love and patient toil, he shaped his ideal woman. She grew into a beautiful girl. Her features were much like her father's. She was petite, graceful, plump, rosy, dignified, and gracious. In her manner there was a calm assurance, the air of mastery over all situations, which she doubtless inherited from him. When she was 18 years of age, she married Joseph Alston of South Carolina, and, with much pain at parting from her father, she went there to live after seeing him inaugurated as Jefferson's vice president. His only consolation was her happiness, and when he returned to New York, he wrote her that he approached the old house as if it had been the sepulchre of all his friends. Dreary, solitary, comfortless, it was no longer home. After her mother's death, Theodosia had been the lady of his household and reigned at the head of his table. When he went back there was no loved face opposite him, and the chill and loneliness struck him to the heart. For 3 years after her marriage, Theodosia was blissfully happy. A boy was born to her and was named Aaron Burr Alston. The vice president visited them in the South and took his namesake unreservedly into his heart. "If I can see without prejudice," he said, "there never was a finer boy." His last act before fighting the duel with Hamilton was writing to his daughter, a happy, gay, carefree letter, giving no hint of what was impending. To her husband he wrote in a different strain, begging him to keep the event from her as long as possible, to make her happy always, and to encourage her in those habits of study which he himself had taught her. She had parted from him with no other pain in her heart than the approaching separation. When they met again, he was a fugitive from justice, travel-stained from his long journey in an open canoe, indicted for murder in New York and in New Jersey, although still President of the Senate and Vice President of the United States. The girl's heart ached bitterly, yet no word of censure escaped her lips, and she still held her head high. When his Mexican scheme was overthrown, Theodosia sat beside him at his trial, wearing her absolute faith so that all the world might see. When he was preparing for his flight to Europe, Theodosia was in New York, and they met by night, secretly, at the house of friends. Just before he sailed, they spent a whole night together, making the best of the little time that remained to them before the inevitable separation. Early in June they parted, little dreaming that they should see each other no more. During the years of exile, Theodosia suffered no less than he. Mr. Alston had lost his faith in Aaron Burr, and the woman's heart strained beneath the burden. Her health failed, her friends shrank from her, yet openly and bravely she clung to her father. Public opinion showed no signs of relenting, and his evil genius followed him across the sea. He was expelled from England, and in Paris he was almost a prisoner. At one time he was obliged to live upon potatoes and dry bread, and his devoted daughter could not help him. He was despised by his countrymen, but Theodosia's adoring love never faltered. In one of her letters she said, "I witness your extraordinary fortitude with new wonder at every misfortune. Often, after reflecting on this subject, you appear to me so superior, so elevated above other men. I contemplate you with such a strange mixture of humility, admiration, reverence, love, and pride, that a very little superstition would be necessary to make me worship you as a superior being. Such enthusiasm does your character excite in me. When I afterward revert to myself, how insignificant do my best qualities appear! My own vanity would be greater if I had not been placed so near you, and yet my pride is in our relationship. I had rather not live than not be the daughter of such a man." She wrote to Mrs. Madison and asked her to intercede with the President for her father. The answer gave the required assurance, and she wrote to her father, urging him to go boldly to New York and resume the practice of his profession. "If worst comes to worst," she wrote, "I will leave everything to suffer with you." He landed in Boston and went on to New York in May of 1812, where his reception was better than he had hoped, and where he soon had a lucrative practice. They planned for him to come south in the summer, and she was almost happy again, when her child died and her mother's heart was broken. She had borne much, and she never recovered from that last blow. Her health failed rapidly, and though she was too weak to undertake the trip, she insisted upon going to New York to see her father. Thinking the voyage might prove beneficial, her husband reluctantly consented, and passage was engaged for her on a pilot boat that had been out privateering and had stopped for supplies before going on to New York. The vessel sailed, and a storm swept the Atlantic coast from Maine to Florida. It was supposed that the ship went down off Cape Hatteras, but 40 years afterward a sailor who died in Texas confessed on his deathbed that he was one of a crew of mutineers who took possession of the Patriot and forced the passengers as well as the officers and men to walk the plank. He professed to remember Mrs. Alston well, and said she was the last one who perished. He never forgot her look of despair as she stepped into the sea, with her head held high, even in the face of death. Among Theodosia's papers was found a letter addressed to her husband, written at a time when she was weary of the struggle. On the envelope was written, "My husband, to be delivered after my death. I wish this to be read immediately and before my burial." He never saw the letter, for he never had the courage to go through her papers, and after his death it was sent to her father. It came to him like a message from the grave. "Let my father see my son sometimes," she had written. "Do not be unkind to him, whom I have loved so much, I beseech of you. Burn all my papers, except my father's letters, which I beg you to return to him." A long time afterward, her father married Madame Jumel, a rich New York woman who was many years his junior, but the alliance was unfortunate and was soon annulled. Through all the rest of his life, he never wholly gave up the hope that Theodosia might return. He clung fondly to the belief that she had been picked up by another ship and some day would be brought back to him. Day by day he haunted the battery, anxiously searching the faces of the incoming passengers, asking some of them for tidings of his daughter, and always believing that the next ship would bring her back. He became a familiar figure, for he was almost always there, a bent, shrunken little man, white-haired, leaning heavily upon his cane, asking questions in a thin piping voice, and straining his dim eyes forever toward the unsounded waters from whence the idol of his heart never came. For out within those waters, cruel, changeless, she sleeps, beyond all rage of earth or sea, a smile upon her dear lips, dumb but waiting, and I hear the sea voice calling me. End of the story of A Daughter's Love, from Threads of Grey and Gold by Myrtle Reed. Read by Elizabeth Parsons.
Torre Abbey by Abbot Francis Aidan Gasquet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The situation of Torre Abbey in the olden days must have been ideal. Placed on the sea coast of Devon, it looked southward across Torre Bay towards Brixham, and it is said to have been the best provided of all the 35 houses of the English Premonstratensian canons. It was founded in 1196 by William Brinier, was endowed with much property in the neighbourhood, and was given the patronage of several churches and chapels. The Abbey of Welbeck became the mother house of Torre, sending one of their number, Adam, with 6 companions to start it, but after 3 years and a half Adam was translated to Newhouse as abbot. The list of the superiors at Torre is far from complete, and little is known of the history of this important abbey beyond what may be gathered from the lately published records of the order in England. One curious story connected with the house in the 14th century has been preserved in the register of Bishop Brantingham of Exeter. In 1390 the bishop solemnly excommunicated the unknown person or persons who had spread abroad a story that the abbot of Torre, William Norton, had murdered and beheaded one of his canons, Simon Hastings. This accusation the bishop pronounced to be an infamous and malicious falsehood, all the more clearly so as the canon in question was actually alive, and had been seen by many both at his abbey and elsewhere. In the year 1456 the abbot of St. Radegund's was the representative in England of the abbot of Premontre. As such, he possessed all powers of visitation over the houses of the order, and was answerable to the chapter of Premonstratensians for the good discipline of the English branch. Acting in that capacity, on September the 10th, 1456, he wrote to the Abbot of Torre, Richard Cade, then recently appointed, about certain rumours he had heard concerning the prior, William Answell. His influence in the house was a bad one, according to reports, as he was a sower of discord and contention, and the visitor directs that the prior be forthwith sent to him at St. Radegund's, that the matter be inquired into. In the same letter, the writer says that he understands that the monastic property has been squandered, that the abbot does not take advice, has taken too great burdens on the house, and has not tried to put a stop to the hurtful dissensions which take place in his monastery. He further suggests to him the propriety of resigning his office as abbot. In 1478 we have the first of the regular series of visitations which afford an insight into the inner history of Torre for the last quarter of the 15th century. In that year Bishop Redman, who was also Abbot of Chappes and visitor of the order in England, appointed by the Abbot General of Prémontré, came to Torre on August the 1st on his first visitation. One canon confessed before him the crime of apostasy, theft, and rebellion, which having been put into plain language meant leaving his enclosure without permission, disobeying his superior, and spending money without leave. He was sent to do penance at the monastery of Newhouse for 40 days on bread and water, followed by 3 years' imprisonment, and a further detention there for another term of 10 years. Another canon accused of apostasy in the same sense was ordered to Welbeck to undergo similar punishment. Bishop Redman enjoined the abbot to try and increase the number of the religious at Torre by every means in his power, and he gave certain regulations for the community life. The brethren were not to drink after Compline without urgent need, and never without full permission. The time of vespers was to be at 4 o'clock, both summer and winter, and all were to be in bed by 8 p.m. He praises the general administration of the abbot, however, and does not find anything of grave importance to correct, or to refer to the general chapter. In his next visitation on September the 21st, 1482, Bishop Redman is able to praise the administration of Abbot Cade in high terms. In obtaining what is for the good of the monastery, he says, the abbot is provident and circumspect beyond any other abbot of the order. At this time one of the canons was accused of breaking open the abbot's treasury, but on inquiry he was able to clear himself. The visitor finds that silence might be kept better, and that the tonsure was getting too big, but there are no grave matters to be corrected or reported to the chapter. Incidentally, we see from the document that the abbot was getting somewhat old and infirm. He was dead before the next visit, and the bishop charges the community to try and assist him when his troubles and sickness should increase upon him, and he should become less able to see to all things himself. It is 6 years before there is any record of another visit to the abbey. This time, for some reason, out of solicitude for the monastery, the document says, the bishop did not actually come to Torre itself. He remained at their house of Durford, in Sussex, and thither the abbot and a proctor for the community went to meet him. In this visit he gives the best report to his investigations. Everything is in an excellent state through the administration of the abbot, now Thomas Dare or Dyer, and the community have a filial affection for him and obey him in all confidence. At the time of the abbot's appointment the house was in debt by 50 marks. Now that sum has been paid and 100 marks are due to them. In the same way the stock and grain has increased by his circumspect provision. 3 years later, on May the 24th, 1491, Bishop Redmond comes again to Torre to discharge his duty as visitor. This time a grave charge of incontinence is brought against one of the community, but after full and patient inquiry the visitor finds him innocent but imprudent. He urges on all the need of being on their guard to avoid giving any occasion for suspicion by their conduct. He reminds them of the rule of the order that no one is to eat or drink in any house within a league of their monastery, and he forbids all games played for money, especially the game of tennis. The canons evidently took the admonition of the visitor to heart, and as a community pulled themselves together, for 3 years later, on June the 12th, 1494, the bishop was able to declare, after examination, that he had found all things in good order and all laws faithfully observed by both superior and subjects. The community also at this time were in a flourishing state. There were no less than 6 novices on the list, all of whom persevered and appear in the list 3 years later as canons professed. Bishop Redmond made 2 other visitations of Torre, in 1497 and in 1500. He had now become Bishop of Exeter, in which diocese Torre Abbey was situated. In order, therefore, to safeguard for the Abbey its privilege of exemption from episcopal visitation, on each of these occasions he protests that he has come to visit the place, not as Bishop of Exeter, but as the commissary of the Abbot of Prémontré, which office he still continues to hold. In 1497 he finds everything in a most satisfactory state. The place, he says, is governed in all things to the honour of God and to the good of the monastery. So much is this so, that nothing whatever there offended my sight, but everything proper to a holy life. In the visitation of 1500 the bishop renews his commendation of the rule of the abbot. He finds all things in an excellent state, but corrects 2 of the canons for carelessness in regard to silence. The community is seen to have increased in numbers in this last glimpse we get of it. 20 years before it was 14, now it is 18, 4 of whom are novices. The last abbot was Simon Reed, elected and confirmed by the king in August 1523. He and his fellow canons surrendered the monastery to the king, February the 23rd, 1539, before the commissioner, William Petrie. The abbot and his religious each received a pension. One of the canons, John Estridge, died within a month of his being expelled from his old home. The church was 200 feet long, but very little of it remains by which to judge of its architecture. There are now standing of the church only portions of the central tower, the east end of the choir, a south chapel, and of the domestic buildings, the entrance of the chapter house, the refectory, a 14th century building 52 feet by 25 feet, and a large gateway of the same date. Of the outbuildings, a fine decorated barn 120 feet long still stands. Dr. Oliver says of Torre that "nothing can exceed the beautiful situation of this great abbey, and if we may judge by the remains of the church, of the chapter house and other buildings, the magnificence of the fabric did honour to the situation." When Leland visited the abbey, 3 fair gateways were standing. 1 gateway remains. The sale of the buildings and effects of the abbey began immediately here as elsewhere. In the accounts of the year ending Michaelmas 1540, Sir John Arundel credits the Augmentation Office with the amount of £43 10s. For the sale of bells and superfluous buildings at Torre. During the same time the same agent had expended £79 13s. 7d. in Devon and Cornwall in defacing, breaking up and pulling down divers churches, bell towers, cloisters, and other buildings of late monasteries. Sir John Arundel likewise acknowledges having received from various rents of Torre lands £180, 7 shillings and 3 halfpence. 2 grants of the property are registered the year after the dissolution. One on March the 4th, 1540, to Sir John Ridgway, and the second on March the 10th to Sir Roger Buett. The receipts from the rents paid in 1540 to Sir Thomas Arundel were £294, 8 shillings and 2pence 3 farthings. End of Torre Abbey by Abbot Francis Aidan Gasquet.
Way Down East by Albert Bigelow Paine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. Way Down East from Life and Lillian Gish by Albert Bigelow Paine. Griffith now began work on his greatest melodrama. Way Down East had been successful as a book and a play, and was precisely the sort of thing he could do best. From William A. Brady, for a large sum, he secured the picture rights and plunged into production. There were to be 2 great outdoor scenes: a blizzard in which the heroine, who has been inveigled into a mock marriage, and is, therefore, under the New England code, fallen and outcast, is lost; and the frozen river, which, blinded and desperate, she reaches, to be carried to the falls on a cake of ice. There was very little that was artificial about such scenes. In that day, the blizzard had to be a real one, the ice real ice, most of it, at any rate. Griffith began rehearsing some scenes at Claridge's Hotel in New York, continuing steadily for 8 weeks, but all the time there was an order that in case of a blizzard, night or day, all hands were to report to the Mamaroneck studio. Lillian had taken Stanford White's house on Orient Point. Reading the play, she knew it was going to be an endurance test, and went into training for it. Cold baths, walks in the cold against the wind, exercises. She had faith in her body being equal to any emergency, if prepared for it. In a magazine article a few years later, she wrote: "The memorable day of March 6th arrived, and with it a snowstorm and a 90-mile-an-hour gale. As I was living at Mamaroneck, near the studio, I quickly reported, and was made up as Anna Moore, ready but not eager for the work to be done. The scene to be taken was the one just after the irate Squire Bartlett turns Anna out of the house into the storm. Dazed and all but frozen, she wanders about through the snow, and finally to the river." The Griffith studio was on a point or arm well out in Long Island Sound. The wind swept this narrow strip with great fury. The cameras had their backs to the gale. She had to face it. She had been out only a short time when her face became caked with snow. Around her eyes this would melt. Her lashes became small icicles. Griffith wanted this, and brought the cameras up close. Her lids were so heavy she could scarcely keep them open. No need of spectacular falls. The difficulty was to keep her feet. She was beaten back, flung about like a toy. Her face became drawn and twisted, almost out of human semblance. When she could stand no more, and was half unconscious, they would pull her back to the studio on a little sled and give her hot tea. A brief rest, and back to the gale. Griffith had invested a large sum in the picture, and she must make good. One could not count on another blizzard that season. Harry Carr writes: "That blizzard scene in Way Down East was real. It was taken in the most god-awful blizzard I ever saw. 3 men lay flat to hold the legs of each camera. I went out 4 times, in order to be a hero, but sneaked back, suffocated and half dead. Lillian stuck out there in front of the cameras. D.W. would ask her if she could stand it, and she would nod. The icicles hung from her lashes, and her face was blue. When the last shot was made, they had to carry her to the studio. A week or two later, they were at White River Junction, Vermont, for the ice scenes. Griffith took a good many of his company, and they put up at an old-fashioned hotel, a place of hospitality and good food. White River Junction is at the confluence of the White and the Connecticut rivers. There is no fall there, but the current moves at the rate of 6 miles an hour, and the water is deep. The ice was from 12 to 16 inches thick, and a good-sized piece of it made a fairly safe craft, but it was wet and slippery and very cold. It was frozen solid when they arrived, had to be sawed and dynamited to get pieces for the floating scene. Lillian conceived the idea of letting her hand and hair drag in the water. It was effective, but her hand became frosted. The chances of pneumonia increased. To the writer, recently, Richard Barthelmess, who had the star part opposite Lillian, said, "Not once, but 20 times a day, for 2 weeks, Lillian floated down on a cake of ice, and I made my way to her, stepping from one cake to another to rescue her. I had on a heavy fur coat, and if I had slipped, or if one of the cakes had cracked and let me through, my chances would not have been good. As for Lillian, why she did not get pneumonia, I still can't understand. She has a wonderful constitution. Before we started, Griffith had us insured against accident and sickness." Lillian, frail as she looked, was the only one of the company who passed 100% perfect condition and health. No accidents happened. The story that I missed a signal and did not reach Lillian in time, and that she came near going over the falls, would indicate that she made the float on the ice cake but once. As I said, she made it numberless times, and there were no falls. Lillian was never nervous, and never afraid. I don't think either of us thought of anything serious happening, though when I was carrying her, stepping from one ice cake to another, we might easily have slipped in. I would not make that picture again for any money that a producer would be willing to pay for it. At the end of the ice scene, there is an instant when the cake, at the brink of a fall, seems to start over, just as Barthelmess, carrying Lillian, steps from it to another, and another, half slipping in before he reaches the bank. The critical moment at the brink of the fall was made in summertime at Winchell Smith's farm, near Farmington, Connecticut. The ice cakes here were painted blocks of wood, or boxes, and were attached to piano wire. There was a real fall of 15 feet at this place, and once a carpenter went over and was considerably damaged. In the picture, as shown, Niagara was blended into this fall with startling effect. Barthelmess remembers that Lillian kept mostly to herself. She took her work very seriously, too much so, in the opinion of her associates. But once there was a barn dance at the hotel, in which she joined, and once she and Barthelmess drove over to Dartmouth College, not far distant, with Mr. and Mrs. Elmer Clifton, to a dinner given them by Barthelmess's fraternity. After dinner, they heard a great tramp, tramp, and someone said to Lillian, "It's the college boys coming to kidnap you." They sometimes did such things, for a lark, but they only wanted to pay their respects. They gathered outside the window, which Mr. Clifton opened, and both Lillian and Barthelmess spoke to them through it. The summer scenes of Way Down East were made at Farmington and at the Mamaroneck studio. Griffith had selected a fine cast, among them Lowell Sherman, the villain, Burr McIntosh as Squire Bartlett, Kate Bruce, his wife, Mary Hay, their niece, and Vivia Ogden, the village gossip. The scene where Squire Bartlett drives Anna Moore from his home was realistic in its harshness, and poor Burr McIntosh, a sweet soul who long before had played Taffy in Trilby, and who loved Lillian dearly, could never get over having been obliged to turn her out into the storm. Often, in after years, he begged her to forgive him. A few minor incidents connected with the making of Way Down East may be recalled. Griffith had spent a great sum of money for the rights, $275,000, it is said, and was spending a great many more thousands producing it. He was naturally on a good deal of attention. All were working to the limit of their strength, but they could not hold the pitch indefinitely. When Barthelmess, who was short, had to stand on a 2-inch piece of board to cope on terms of equality with Lowell Sherman, Sherman, who was a trained actor of the stage, could, and did, make invisible side remarks which made Barthelmess laugh. Whereupon Griffith raged at the waste of time and film, and everybody was sorry, the villain penitent. "Stop that laughing! Turn around and face the camera!" were sharp admonitions perpetuated by a right-about face in the picture to this day. It was harsh in form rather than by intention. They did not resent these scoldings. They believed in Griffith, knew something of his problems, wanted him to make good. There was one scene during which Griffith had no word to offer. The scene in which Anna Moore, Lillian, baptizes her dying child. Harry Carr writes: "The only time I ever saw a stagehand cry was in the baptism scene in Way Down East. It was made in a boxed off corner, with only D.W., Lillian, the cameraman, a stagehand, and myself there. Everybody cried. It never made the same impression on the screen, because it was necessary to interrupt the action with the subtitles. You saw her dripping the water on the baby's head, then a subtitle flashed on, saying, 'In the name of the Father,' etc., and the spell was broken. Carr, Lillian, and Griffith would sit far into the night, watching rushes from the scenes made the day before. It was a drowsy occupation, so many of the same thing, and after a day in the open, it was not surprising that Carr should nod. Across a misty plain of sleep, Griffith's voice would come to him. 'Which shot do you like best, Carr?' It is noticeable in the baptism scene that Lillian sits relaxed, her knees apart, that when she leaves the house, she walks with a dragging step, as one who had recently experienced the struggle and agonies of childbirth. It has been suggested that she had visited a maternity hospital for these details. When asked, she said, "No, I did not do that. There was an old woman connected with the studio, who had borne a number of children. She told me all that I needed to know. I learned something, too, from pictures of the Madonna by old masters. I noticed in all of them that the Madonna sat with her knees apart. I felt that there must be a good reason for painting her in that way." She had studied out every detail of the scenes she was to play. Many actors, even among the best, work by another method. They absorb the feelings of the plot, fling themselves into a scene, depending upon an angel to kindle the divine fire. This method never was Lillian's. To her the bush never of itself became a burning bush. She lit the fire and tended it. She knew the effect she wanted to produce, and found no research too tedious, no rehearsal too long, no effort too great to achieve her end. Way Down East was shown in October. Griffith, with Lillian and Barthelmess, were present in person in the larger cities. It was like a triumphal tour. To present the world's darling in scenes of actual danger on the screen, and then have her appear in person, was to invite something in the nature of a riot. Reporters indulged in the most extravagant language, and there was a freshet of poetry and of letters, love letters many of them, but letters also from persons distinctly worthwhile. David Belasco, whose most beautiful blonde, Verdict, had long since gone into the discard démodé, wrote, "Dear Lillian Gish, it was a revelation to see the little girl who was with me only a few years ago moving through the pictured version of Way Down East with such perfect acting. In this play you reach the very highest point in action, charm, and delightful expression. It made me happy, too, to see how you and your name appeal to the public. Congratulations on a splendid piece of work, and good wishes for your continued success. Faithfully, David Belasco. John Barrymore went even further when he wrote, My dear Mr. Griffith, I have for the second time seen your picture of Way Down East. Any personal praise of yourself or your genius regarding the picture I would naturally consider redundant and a little like carrying coals to Newcastle. I have not the honour of knowing Miss Gish personally, and I am afraid that any expression of feeling addressed to her she might consider impertinent. I merely wish to tell you that her performance seems to me to be the most superlatively exquisite and poignantly enchaining thing that I have ever seen in my life. I remember seeing Douce in this country many years ago, when I imagined she must have been at the height of her powers, also Madame Bernhardt, and for sheer technical brilliancy and great emotional projection, done with an almost uncanny simplicity and sincerity of method, it is great fun and a great stimulant to see an American artist equal, if not surpass, the finest traditions of the theatre. I wonder if you would be good enough to thank Miss Gish from all of us who are trying to do the best we know how in the theatre. Believe me, yours very sincerely, John Barrymore. Mrs. Gish, who was not a motion picture enthusiast, made a single comment. Well, young lady, she said, you set quite a high mark for yourself. How are you going to live up to it? Way Down East was one of the most popular and profitable pictures ever made. Net returns from it ran into the millions. It has had several revivals, and at the present writing, winter 1931, is being shown at the Cameo Theatre, New York, with sound. Its day, however, is over. Taste has changed, has become what an older generation might regard as unduly sophisticated, depraved. This, with mechanical advancement. The talking feature, for instance, tells the story. A picture of even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, is without a public. Way Down East is a melodrama, but one that at moments rises to considerable heights. Putting aside the spectacular features of the picture, the blizzard and the ice drift, where melodrama is raised to the nth degree, the scene where the villain reveals to his victim that their marriage was a mockery, the scene where Anna Moore, about to be turned out into the storm, denounces her betrayer, and the baptismal scene, already mentioned, are drama, and, as Lillian Gish gave them, worthy. And after all, what is and is not melodrama? And cheap, because it is human. That is why we have invented for ourselves a hereafter, a place away from it all, of rest by green fields and running brooks. Very well, let us agree that the play was cheap, especially the comedy, which was low comedy, and about the record in that direction. But if Lillian's acting was cheap and poor, then there is very little to be said for any acting, which, God knows, may be true enough after all. End of Way Down East by Albert Bigelow Paine.
The Wright Brothers and Their Problem, from Story of the Aeroplane by C.B. Galbraith. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The dawn of the 20th century was to immortalize new names in the annals of aviation. In the city of Dayton, Ohio, two brothers in a modest way were conducting a bicycle repair shop. From youth, they had been inseparable in their aims and work. They were the sons of Bishop Milton Wright of the United Brethren Church. They had each a high school education, but had not attended college. In 1878, when they were boys of 7 and 11 years respectively, their father brought them one evening a little flying toy, a small helicopter, the motive power of which was furnished by a rubber band wound around the shafts of 2 propellers so as to drive them, when wound up and released, in opposite directions. The toy was made of light material to resemble a bird. When the father released it in the presence of the wondering boys, to their astonishment it flew upward in the room, rose to the ceiling, and after fluttering there for a little while fell to the floor. They did not concern themselves much about the name of the toy, but properly called it what to their minds it most closely resembled, the bat. They afterward made other toys like it, and discovered that as they were increased in size, they flew less successfully. They early developed a fondness for kite flying, and in this were regarded as experts. When they grew to manhood, however, they abandoned these boyish sports and devoted themselves industriously to their machine and repair shop. The bat and the kite became memories, but the memories of youth have power to shape the thoughts of manhood, and this early observation and experience with aerial toys gave to Wilbur and Orville Wright an interest in the attempts at aviation that were chronicled in the press from time to time through the decade immediately preceding this new century. In the year 1896, Orville, the younger of the 2 brothers, was convalescing from a serious attack of typhoid fever. Wilbur, who had been carefully attending him, was one day reading aloud an account of the death of Otto Lilienthal, the German aviator, who was killed while experimenting with his glider. The details of the tragic accident, together with an account of what he had accomplished by years of investigation and experiment, interested the brothers, who resolved as soon as possible to apply themselves to the construction of a glider in which flights could be made with comparative safety. The enthusiasm of Orville over the project ran so high that it almost caused a return of the fever. As soon as he had fully recovered, the 2 brothers returned to their bicycle shop and applied themselves with increasing zeal to the study of aeronautics, and after a time began the construction of a glider. The Wright brothers were peculiarly well equipped for the work upon which they had entered. They were men of unflagging industry, abstemious habits, few words, and the happy faculty of keeping their own counsel. Wilbur was unusually reticent. It is said of him that he spoke only when he had something to say, and then in a manner singularly brief and direct. He had an unlimited capacity for hard work, nerves of steel, and the kind of daring that makes the aviator face death with pleasure every minute of the time he is in the air. Orville, while much like his brother, is more talkative and approachable. Both were modest and unassuming when they began their work, and continued so when the world applauded their achievements. In the study of the problem upon the solution of which they ventured, they had of course the advantage of all that had thus far been achieved by those who had preceded them in this field of investigation and experiment. Professor Langley had already perfected his first monoplane to such an extent that short flights were successfully made with a light steam-propelled model. He was continuing his experiments, and the Wright brothers read with avidity the results of his work. Every scrap of information that they could gather from others who had essayed the solution of the problem was now collected and made the subject of critical study. At first taking up aeronautics merely as a sport, they soon afterward with zest began its more serious pursuit. "We reluctantly entered upon the scientific side of it," they said, "but we soon found the work so fascinating that we were drawn into it deeper and deeper." In their efforts to construct a practical flying machine, they adopted the plan of Lilienthal and Chanute. They sought to construct a machine which they could control and in which they could make glides with safety. This they built in the form of a biplane glider, and with it they experimented industriously for years. The successful construction of the machine required a high degree of skill. The length and width of the planes, their distance apart, the materials to be used, the shape, size, and position of the rudder, and numerous other details were to be worked out only by patient study and frequent tests. They were now in the field of original experiment, and soon found that they had to reject as useless many theories that had been carefully elaborated by scholarly writers. The brothers soon learned that a long, narrow plane in a position nearly horizontal, moved in a direction at right angles to one of its lateral edges, and inclined or tipped slightly upward, would develop greater lifting power than a square or circular plane. This discovery was not indeed original with them, but their experiments confirm the conclusions of their predecessors. The surface shape of the plane is an important consideration. It has been found that a slight upward arch from beneath, making the undersurface concave, gives the best results. The concavity should reach its maximum about 1/3 of the distance from the front or entering edge to the rear edge of the plane, and should be the same whether one or more planes are used. In flight, the forward or entering edges of the planes are tipped slightly upward to give the machine lifting power, for the same reason that the top of a kite is given an angle of elevation so that the air will lift it as it is drawn forward by the string. End of The Wright Brothers and Their Problem, from Story of the Aeroplane by C.B. Galbraith. Read by Andrea K.